I remember the first time I saw Catherine, a high school day in warm spring. Her striking red hair and vibrant green eyes immediately caught my attention. Little did I know, that day would start a journey spanning decades. We became inseparable, exploring life together through high school dances and summer jobs. As we grew older, our bond strengthened. Despite the challenges of young love, our connection remained unbreakable. Catherine's fiery spirit and determination deeply impressed me. By 16, our friendship blossomed into something deeper. We shared dreams, fears, and aspirations, building a partnership based on trust and respect. By graduation, we were already planning our future together. In the past 3 months, especially the last one, Catherine hadn't felt like studying with me. Our most recent argument happened last night, and her behavior had worn me out. Known for her fierce temper and grudges, Catherine was always strong-willed. Born Catherine O'Brien, she now went by Catherine McCarthy, never Kate or Katie. Early in our relationship, I tried calling her Kat, and she made it clear she didn't like it. I'm Kurt McCarthy, her husband. We've been together since high school, dating since 16. I learned to steer clear during her tirades, and it's been like that for 26 years, with 22 as husband and wife. Despite her temper, I loved everything about her. We were each other's first boyfriend and girlfriend and shared our first kiss. Early in our dating life, Catherine declared she wanted to be a maid on her wedding day, which I respected. Today, like many times before, she said, "I like the way you do it." This time, though, it felt different. Afterward, I got up to shower, knowing I had to be quick to get there first. As the water streamed down, I pondered her words. She had said them countless times, but now they bothered me. Our relationship had been strained recently, and I wasn't sure why. Usually her moods lasted a week or 10 days, never a whole month. I finished my shower and told her it was her turn. She groaned, but got up and headed to the bathroom. In the first year of marriage, we couldn't get enough of each other, even during our jobs as a mechanic and a Target worker. Those were our poor but deeply in love days. I worked as a mechanic until about age 28, when a local Napa franchise owner offered me a management position. He liked my car knowledge and customer skills. One night, he took me out to discuss business opportunities, offering to train me and eventually sell the franchise to me. The deal was, I'd earn the same $40,000 a year for 10 years, and he'd save $20,000 annually for my down payment. We sealed it with a handshake, and I gave 2 weeks' notice to start working for him. This job allowed flexibility to attend my kids' sports games, but required nights and weekends. When I told Catherine about the new job, she was furious I hadn't discussed it with her first, especially since nothing was in writing. I explained it would let me be more present for our kids and would benefit us all in the long run. She didn't want to hear anything and ignored me for over a week. I hoped my plan wouldn't work out because I dreaded facing Catherine's wrath, which I had experienced many times before, on camping trips, birthdays, and vacations. 8 years later, I looked forward to surprising her after just 2 years. However, the lack of pay raises over the years led to heated arguments. I told her to trust me, which was hard for her. My schedule changed from 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. as a mechanic to a flexible 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. during the week and some weekends. This allowed me to attend my kids' baseball, softball, and soccer games. About 2 years ago, I noticed a change in Catherine. Her short temper grew worse, and she began belittling me, hurting my ego and causing resentment. The past 3 months have been particularly bad. Attempts to talk helped briefly, but then things would get worse again. Mentioning it now only annoys her more. This tension affected our home life. I preferred working to being home with her. Meanwhile, our business grew to 4 locations with a steady commercial growth. Catherine, always a hard worker, returned to work soon after our kids were born, and now manages an insurance office. I know managing people is stressful, which might explain her attitude. When I asked her what had changed, she had no answer and got angry. As I dressed for housework, I remembered the gorgeous morning but couldn't shake a nagging feeling. "I like the way you do it," she had said, but it bothered me now. The rest of the week, things went back to her irritable normal. On Friday, she came home late and demanded attention in the bedroom, which angered me. She said, "I need you to cater to me." I replied, "I don't jump on your command. You can service yourself." I slept in my son Kevin's room. When I went to get clothes, I saw a text on her phone from CB asking, "So did he do it?" I felt sick. "I like the way you do it," she had said differently, emphasizing you as if comparing me to someone. She had no one to compare me to, or did she? I threw up and Catherine asked if I was okay. I told her I felt nauseous and needed time to think. She asked if I ate something bad, and I said, probably, avoiding her touch and claiming I didn't want her to catch anything. I went to the store to get something for my stomach. Driving, I thought about the last few months and 2 years. She must have had an affair. I needed proof but didn't have her phone or computer passwords. We had always trusted each other's privacy. I had to find out somehow. I drove around the neighborhood but couldn't stay out too long or Catherine would worry. I stopped at the grocery store and picked up Pepto-Bismol, Dayquil, and NyQuil. When I got home, I took some Pepto and NyQuil, then went straight to my son's room. Catherine came in and asked, "Are you feeling better?" I mumbled something, undressed, and got into bed. When she touched my forehead and said, "You're not hot," I thought, how could she do this to us? She offered to make chicken noodle soup, but I told her, no, I'll just throw it up. I didn't trust her and wanted her to leave. "I'm going to bed. I'll feel better after some sleep," I said. "Okay, I'll check on you later," she replied as she left. I wasn't going to sleep. Memories of our life together flooded my mind. Meeting, marriage, kids, vacations, and graduations. I couldn't find anything to explain my suspicions. I needed proof. Lying there, I began to formulate a plan. If she cheated, I could never forgive her. Somehow, I had to find out. I got up to use the bathroom, and her phone was on the nightstand. I saw a message from CB. I made a reservation for Wednesday afternoon. A hotel reservation, I thought. I could take Wednesday afternoon off and follow her. Pretending to be sick on Saturday and Sunday, and my schedule on Monday and Tuesday minimized my contact with her. We still shared a bed, but there was no contact. It's amazing how love can turn to repulsion so quickly. On Wednesday, I left work at lunch and drove to her office. I ate a little, but my stomach was in knots. I parked where I could see her building, but remained hidden. After an hour and a half, I doubted myself. Was it an innocent message? At 2:30, I saw her boss leave alone, increasing my doubts. 15 minutes later, Catherine left. I followed her to a motel where she parked next to her boss's car. I parked out of sight and watched as she walked to her room, greeted by Carl. I took a picture as the door closed. My suspicions were true. She would pay for this. I drove home furious. Caitlin was at softball practice, giving me time to plan my next move. We lived on the outskirts of town and bought our house for its room to build a 2-car garage with a finished room upstairs, my man cave. I installed a hoist to work on cars and even had a bed upstairs for when I was in the doghouse, which I called my garage. When I got home, I moved my clothes and toiletries to the man cave, anticipating Catherine's return. She came home at 5:30, and I was watching TV, ignoring her. She asked about Caitlin, and I said she was probably out with friends. Catherine then suggested we have an evening together, hinting she wanted something from me. I played along, and we went to the bedroom. As she came out of the bathroom, I saw her as the 42-year-old woman she had become. To cope, I closed my eyes and thought of younger women. I opened the nightstand drawer, and she asked what I was doing. "Putting on protection," I said calmly, suggesting I didn't trust her. She exploded, accusing me of being a failure and not asking for a raise in 8 years. She had lost respect for me. I dressed and left for the doghouse, with her yelling for me to come down and face her. I called the police, anticipating her rage. She pounded on the door, screaming obscenities. After it got quiet, I smelled something unusual and saw my workshop on fire. Catherine was outside, smiling. I escaped through a window and twisted my ankle, jumping down. As I crawled away, she continued shouting insults until the police arrived. One officer called for a fire truck, while another subdued and handcuffed Catherine, who screamed, "Take it away, you a-holes! Your precious doghouse is going to burn down!" The officer put her in the patrol car and asked me what happened. I told him a simplified version of the evening's events. We were both taken to the police station, where I gave a statement. Catherine was arrested for arson and possible attempted liquidation. I asked about a restraining order, and the officer advised me to talk to a lawyer. I called my lawyer, who referred me to a criminal defense attorney. The next day, I got a restraining order preventing Catherine from coming within 500 feet of our home, my workplace, or me. She was still in jail until her arraignment hearing. Irish luck was on my side. That night, I told Kevin and Caitlin what happened. Caitlin wasn't surprised by her mom's actions, having seen her anger before. She hugged me after I apologized. Kevin was furious, but would eventually get over it. The next day, I filed for divorce. When I returned home, a police car was in the driveway. Catherine was allowed to collect her things under supervision. She had posted bail, likely with her lover's help. The weekend was spent dealing with the wreckage of my garage. I salvaged some tools, but my diagnostic equipment was ruined. My insurance agent couldn't confirm coverage due to Catherine's co-ownership. Reflecting on our life, I realized trust was broken beyond repair. I needed to understand why. Was Carl the first? Had I done something wrong? Her yelling indicated she didn't respect me. Did their conversations lead to this? Was Carl belittling me too? I researched Carl Benson online. He was hired 2 years ago as a general manager at my wife's company, around the time she started acting differently. I learned Carl was divorced with 3 kids and lived an hour away. I planned to contact my wife's boss, whom I knew from company events and car services at my shop. I would call him Monday. Sunday night, Catherine called, apologizing for setting the garage on fire. I responded, "So what?" She asked. "Can I go home then?" "No, I have a restraining order," I replied. "Mom and Dad bailed me out. They're not thrilled," she said. "Neither am I," I retorted. "Can we talk and work it out?" she asked. "No, there's nothing to solve," I replied firmly. "Kurt, you know I love you. It's just my temper," she pleaded. "No, I don't know if you love me. If you did, you wouldn't be sleeping with your boss," I countered. "That's not true," she said defensively. "What's not true? That I don't know if you love me, or that you're sleeping with your boss?" I questioned. "Both," she replied. "Catherine, I saw you with him at the motel. Don't deny it," I accused. She gasped. "Why?" I asked, pressing further. "It was a mistake, a one-time thing," she claimed. "Nonsense, Catherine. I'm tired of your lies," I said, hanging up and turning off my phone. Half an hour later, her father, who was like a second father to me, knocked on my door. I could see the confusion on his face. "What did she tell you?" I asked. "That you had a fight and you kicked her out," he replied. I shook my head. "So how did she explain being in jail?" I asked. "She said she was burning your car repair manuals in the garage, and it got out of hand," he answered. I shook my head again. "You need to get the truth from her," I told him. "Are you going to tell me the truth?" he asked. "I don't think you want to hear it, Mr. O'Brien," I replied. "Why the formalities?" "You know I consider you my son," he said. "Because soon we won't have that relationship. You'll probably hate me," I explained. "Is it really that bad?" he asked hesitantly. I nodded, and he understood. No father wants to think about his daughter doing such things. He nodded, turned, and left. A few hours later, he texted me, "I'm sorry." She must have confessed. I'm sure there were heated arguments at their house, maybe even a visit to the confessional. When I called her boss, he recognized my name immediately. "Kurt, how are you? What's up?" "I'm sorry, sir, but this isn't a pleasant call," I began. "Oh?" he said, waiting. "My wife and I are getting a divorce because she was having an affair with Carl Benson," I stated. "Oh, crap," he said. "I knew I should have trusted my instincts. I should have checked him out more thoroughly." "It's not your fault. They're both adults," I reassured him. "Kurt, give me until the end of the week. I can't change the past, but I can address this," he offered. "Sir, if you fire Catherine, it will hurt me financially in the divorce. I'd appreciate your help with that," I requested. "She's always done a great job for me, so yes, I'll keep her," he agreed. I thanked him, and we ended the call. He was a good guy, and keeping Catherine employed would help me. The divorce papers were served to her at work discreetly. She called me immediately, starting with, "You goddamn prick." I hung up. Being a mechanic, I knew a lot about cars. I had never used that knowledge maliciously, but Carl Benson's Lexus was about to need a new engine. Friday was not good for Carl. He was late because his car broke down. When he arrived at work, the owner fired him for unbecoming behavior. Catherine called again. "What did you do?" she demanded. "What are you talking about?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "You know exactly what I mean," she snapped. "Catherine, talk to our lawyers. Don't call me again." I hung up. She tried calling back, but I ignored it. My revenge on Carl wasn't over. I contacted his ex-wife and explained my situation. She was eager to help. Saturday night, I made reservations at our favorite restaurant and invited Kevin and Caitlin. I wanted Catherine, and by extension Carl, to find out about it. The 3 of us arrived before Carl's ex, Molly, as planned. There were 4 place settings, so my kids thought their mom would join us. When Molly arrived, I introduced her to Kevin and Caitlin, explaining she was Carl Benson's ex-wife and wanted to share her story. Molly recounted her divorce, forgiving Carl once for infidelity, but ending things when he cheated again. She emphasized that trust is crucial in any relationship, and that without it, there's no foundation to build on. She explained that my divorce wasn't because I didn't love their mom, but because trust was broken. By the end of dinner, we all talked openly. Caitlin admitted she'd suspected something was wrong for a year. After dinner, Caitlin asked if I was going home. I said, "I'm asking Molly to the dance if she's up for it." Molly nodded, and we danced until 11 o'clock. I drove her to her hotel, but declined her invitation to her room, feeling it was too soon. We agreed to have breakfast together the next day. At breakfast, the waitress, Heather, was surprised to see me with someone other than Catherine. I introduced Molly, and we had a hearty meal. Knowing gossip would spread, I knew Catherine would find out. We spent the day together before Molly left. She told me to reach out if I wanted to spend more time together. Catherine did find out and called me, accusing me of seeing other women. I told her we were getting a divorce and her actions wouldn't stop it. She finally signed the papers after talking to her father. At Caitlin's graduation, I saw Catherine for the first time since our split. She looked older and had lost weight. She asked if I was still seeing Carl's ex, implying we were together. I told her Molly was amazing. When I asked where Carl was, she said he was fired and moved out of state. I responded that she didn't love me enough and walked away, hearing her break down and her mother call me an a-hole. The open house was scheduled for the following Saturday at our home. Despite the pending divorce, Catherine and I agreed to host it there. I let her handle the arrangements, lifting the restraining order to allow her access. It was hard seeing her in familiar settings. Molly was right. I still loved her despite hating her. After Caitlin left with her friends, I was in the kitchen taking out the trash when Catherine approached me. "Thank you for having the open house here and letting me be here," she said. "You'll always be her mother," I replied, continuing with the trash. "Kurt, can you look at me?" I stopped and looked up. "I'm sorry for what I did to us," she said, the first time she apologized for the affair. "Why did you do that?" I asked. She cried and ran out of the room, unable to answer. Months passed and our divorce progressed. Last year, Caitlin got a college acceptance letter and we took out a second mortgage to pay her tuition and help Kevin start his auto repair shop. We split the little remaining equity from selling the house with no alimony since we earned about the same. Catherine pleaded guilty to arson, received 2 years probation, and took anger management classes and therapy. When the divorce was final, Catherine asked to talk. We met at our favorite restaurant. She looked nervous but better. During dinner, she apologized again, explaining she had lost respect for me when she saw Carl as ambitious and me as stagnant. She realized my sacrifices for our children and regretted her actions. "Thank you," I said. "I'm sorry I didn't live up to your expectations." We parted with a hug, and she offered to be there if I ever needed to vent. I doubted I'd take her up on it. On the way home, I called Molly. "Are you still available?" I asked. "I'm available," she replied. "When can we meet?" I inquired. "Your place or mine?" she asked. "Yours," I replied. We had a great dinner at her house. I wanted to be honest, so I said, "Molly, I really like you. I don't know where this is going, but I want you to know I have 2 reasons. 1, you're an amazing woman. 2, I want revenge. You're my first since my wife cheated. I respect you and don't want you to feel used." "Kurt," she said, "I've realized I want you too. Part of me wants revenge as well. I never got back at Carl's other women. Let's even the score." With those words, we headed to the bedroom. An hour later, I lay there thinking about my ex, Catherine. In the early days of our relationship, I noticed her bad temper, which worsened over the years. She would lash out verbally and sometimes physically. I'm Irish and have a temper too, but I was taught never to hit back. When she got violent, I would retreat to my doghouse. This likely made her respect me even less, seeing me as weak. When she set fire to my garage with me inside, I realized I couldn't continue. I feared waking up one night with a knife in me. The betrayal and lack of trust forced me to end our marriage. I was now a free man, but uncertain if I could trust another woman fully. Molly was about revenge and regaining my pride. She was wonderful, but we couldn't build a real relationship on our shared animosity. We could be friends with benefits, but that was it. Lying together, I said, "You're amazing, Molly. You knew exactly what I needed." "You did all the work," she replied. "You're an incredible lover. I can't believe your ex looked elsewhere." "I hoped we could continue our friends with benefits relationship," I said, enjoying our time together. As I was leaving, she kissed me and said, "I hope this continues." "Me too, but I'm not ready for a serious relationship yet," I replied. Then I hesitantly asked, "Can you make sure your ex knows about us? I'll do the same." "That sounds delightful," she said, smiling slyly. "I'm sorry if I seemed vindictive, but I wanted some revenge too." I texted Catherine. Call me when you have time. Can be Monday. Nothing urgent. She called within minutes. Hey, Kurt, are you taking me up on my offer? She asked. No, I'm exhausted. Molly is very energetic, I replied. Silence followed. Then I heard her count to 10. I didn't call you. I texted. You could have called Monday, I said. I'm sorry, she replied, showing that anger management had partially worked. I wanted to discuss Caitlin's plans. Any vacations I should know about? I asked. I'll talk to her and call you back, she said. Okay, anytime. Just let me know. I hoped my casual attitude would sting. I wanted her to feel my indifference. A week later, Carl knocked on my door. I called emergency and opened the door. He burst in, yelling, "Stay away from my wife." You mean your ex-wife? She kicked you out for cheating, I replied. Stay away from Molly, he muttered. Why should I stay away from her? She's amazing, I taunted. He lost his temper and lunged at me, swinging his arms. I deflected the first blow, but let the second one land to show him the damage. A mechanic is usually in better shape than an office worker. By the time the cops arrived, we were both in rough shape, but he looked worse. They separated us, realized I made the call, and put him in the patrol car. I cleaned up and called Molly to let her know her ex-husband was in jail. I know, she said. He had the nerve to ask me to bail him out. Are you all right? A bit bruised, but he got the worst of it, I replied. I'll be right over to play nurse, she said, and hung up. About an hour later, she was taking care of me. I was glad I worked the late shift the next day and didn't have to get up until 11 o'clock. She left after a while, saying, I love the way you do it. Your tongue and fingers are magical. I wondered if I should back off. I needed to have a serious conversation with her soon. After lunch at work, I got a call from Catherine. What did you do? She asked. Well, hi to you too, I said. Yeah, hi. What did you do? What are you talking about? I played dumb. You arrested Carl? No, he arrested himself, I replied. That's not what he said, she countered. So you're taking his word over mine? Sounds about right, I said sarcastically. He's not my lover. That ended over a month ago, she insisted. Says you, I teased. Why do you have to be such a bum? She snapped. I must have had a good teacher, I replied. Are you going to drop the charges? She asked. Why would I? He broke into my apartment and attacked me, I explained. Because he'll lose his job and because I asked you to, she pleaded. You're not my wife anymore. I don't have to do anything you say, I stated. I hung up. Months after their fling, she was still trying to help him. He was charged with attack and battery and will likely spend at least 90 days in jail. He'll definitely lose his job. I just smiled when I heard that. That Thursday, I ended up at Smitty's, our old bar. When life goes downhill, familiar places can help you regain your senses. I was at a small pub table, sipping a beer, when I heard a familiar laugh, my ex. She was with her office friends, about half a dozen of them. Catherine saw me and almost stopped. She said something to her friends and they found a table far from me. However, they had to pass my table to get to the bathroom. After about 10 minutes, 2 women headed for the restroom. One stopped at my table and asked, You're Catherine's ex, right? I nodded. I've heard a lot about you, she said with a twinkle in her eye. I wasn't sure what she'd heard, but I doubted it was good. On their way back, both women stopped to talk and flirt with me. One was about 10 years younger, the other 15. Unlike guys, these women didn't seem to mind flirting with a friend's ex. I flirted back, thinking a fling with one of them would annoy my ex. Yes, I was vindictive. As they left, one woman shook my hand and slipped me a piece of paper. I waited until they were back at their table to look. It was her business card with her cell number, Shannon Lozano. I saw Catherine looking at me with sadness, quickly replaced by the familiar fury. I reflected on our relationship. I still loved her, but living with her was like living with an active volcano. I would have stayed if she hadn't cheated. Was I better off now? I didn't know. Ignorance is bliss, and I guess I was in my own bliss. I finished my beer, threw a 10 on the table, waved to the waitress, and walked out, avoiding my ex's table. I didn't want her to see the tears forming in my eyes. Late Saturday morning, I dialed Shannon's number from the business card she gave me. She answered on the 3rd ring. Hello? She said uncertainly. Hi, Shannon. This is Kurt McCarthy. We met at the bar Thursday night, I said. Yes, I remember you. The handsome man sitting alone, drinking a beer, she responded. I blushed and replied, Yeah, that was me. I just needed to relax and think. Would you like to talk about those thoughts? She asked directly. Yeah, I think I would, I admitted. How about tonight? She suggested. Sure, How about Smitty's at 7:30? I proposed. I'll be there, she said. After hanging up, I felt nervous. What would a younger woman see in me? I hadn't dated in over 25 years. I dressed business casual, wanting to make an effort. We hit it off immediately. She was pleasant to talk to and look at. Once I felt comfortable, I asked what had been on my mind. You work with my ex, so you've probably heard bad things about me. Why would you want to date me? I asked. Before she got involved with Carl, she said things about you that intrigued and excited me, she explained. She'd been socializing with Carl for about a year before you served her with divorce papers. The affair likely started 3 months before that, she added. This matched what I knew about her changing attitude. During bachelorette parties, she mentioned being pleased with your performance, she said, looking at me with intensity. I blushed, never expecting Catherine to talk about me like that. Don't be embarrassed. If you're as good as she said, you'll be a pleasant adventure, she added. As we finished our food and drinks, the waitress brought the check. I handed her $50 and she smiled, saying, You better keep this check. You might win a prize. I looked at her puzzled. She winked and I slipped the check into my pocket. As we walked out, Shannon took my hand and softly said, Now for dessert. I was taken aback since it had been a long time since I had gone on a date. Your place or mine? She asked. I'll let you decide, I replied. I want you to be comfortable, she said. Let's go to your place. You can tell a lot about a person by seeing how they live. She jumped into my truck so I would have to bring her back for her car later. Do you think your car will be safe here for the night? I asked. Yes, she said. I took an Uber for that reason. I felt out of touch with today's reality again. When we got to my place, we rushed to the bedroom. We finally fell asleep until 10 a.m. We had lunch at Chili's and then I drove her home. She made me promise to call her for a repeat. I assured her I would. On the way home, I noticed the check from Smitty's in my wallet. The waitress had written her name and number on it. This new reality would take some getting used to. Monday after work, I went back to Smitty's, and Helen, the waitress, was there. Closer to my age, we talked for a while, and I asked, When can we go out? Since weekends were busy for her, we planned a Wednesday date, her day off. As I walked to my truck, I got a call. Hello, I said, not recognizing the number. Hello, Kurt, said a female voice. Yes, I answered. This is Bethany. I met you last Thursday night at Smitty's with Shannon. Oh yes, I remember you, I said. Shannon said she had a great time with you Saturday night. I was wondering if we could go out sometime, she suggested. Aren't I a little old for you? I asked. Not at all. I prefer older guys. They're more mature and easier to get along with, she replied. Well, sure. How about this Saturday? I proposed. Sure, she agreed. Where would you like to go? I asked. Anywhere. I'll let you decide. I'm flexible, she said. We set a date for Saturday night, and Bethany proved to be very flexible. We tried positions I never thought possible. My Wednesday date with Helen went great, too. Like Shannon and Molly, she said, I like the way you do it. Both women. On Sunday, Molly invited me over for dinner. A home-cooked meal sounded wonderful, so I said yes. After an amazing meal, we spent time working. I was beginning to really enjoy single life. Monday night, I got a call from Catherine. What the hell do you think you're doing? She asked angrily. Sitting here watching TV, I replied, playing dumb. No, I mean you, a 40-year-old man dating women 10 and 15 years younger than you. Don't you have any remorse? She demanded. You must be talking about Shannon and Bethany, I stated. Yes, of course, she confirmed. They both asked me out. Instead of being alone, I said yes. Dating has changed. I like not having to ask a woman out and face rejection. It's nice to be wanted and appreciated, I explained. Well then, stop dating the people I work with, she demanded. Why would I do that? I asked. Because I said so, she replied. I don't have to do what you say anymore. We're not married. I'll date whoever I choose, I asserted. You're only doing this to make my life harder, she accused. No, but if it does, it's a bonus. How does my dating them affect you? I asked. They whisper behind my back and say, I can't believe she let him go. They're basically calling me an idiot, she explained. I thought, if the shoe fits, but said, I'll ask them to keep our activities private. Will that help? No, just stop seeing them, she demanded again. That I won't do unless they want to. I enjoy spending time with them. They make me feel young and boost my ego, I stated. You're an a-hole, she said, hanging up. I smiled, thinking about my time with each of them. They did wonders for my ego. Wednesday, I had another pleasant evening with Helen. My life was enjoyable. Thursday night, Catherine called again. Now what? I thought. I haven't met Shannon or Bethany yet, so I haven't had a chance to talk to them, I muttered to myself. Then, answering the call, I said, "Yes. How can I help you, Catherine?" "And the waitress at Smitty's, too." "Well, she's more age-appropriate. I thought you didn't want me dating younger women," she replied. "I don't want you dating at all. I constantly have to answer questions about why I let you go," she said with annoyance. "Tell them someone else was more your style, more in line with your life aspirations," I suggested. She was quiet for a moment, then said in a low voice, "I'll just tell them I was stupid." Then she hung up. I sat back and reflected on my life. Catherine and I had some good times, but she started drifting away when Carl was hired. Maybe something was going on even then. Now, at least, she was showing remorse. I had mixed feelings. Part of me was glad she felt stupid for giving up everything we had, but another part wished things could go back to how they were. I knew that was impossible. The past couldn't be changed, and I couldn't forget or live with it. Feeling sorry for myself, I decided to go to the store for beer. As I left with a case of Shiner Bock, Shannon called. "What's up?" she asked. "I just bought a case of beer to drown my sorrows," I replied. "Can I help with that? I can try to cheer you up," she offered. "Sure, you might be just what the doctor ordered," I said. We drank a bit, and she expressed her pleasure many times. Around 2 a.m., she said, "I have to work tomorrow, so I'd better get going. Oh, and thanks for mentioning something to Catherine. But if you could keep tonight to yourself, I'd appreciate it," I requested. "She seemed a bit down earlier, but it's still hard to believe she let you go," she said. "Thank you. You've successfully relieved me of my sadness," I responded. "Anytime," she replied. "And I mean anytime." Over the next year, my number of friends with benefits grew. Shannon, Bethany, Molly, and Helen all learned of my abilities and wanted to experience them. I didn't turn any of them down. Each woman was a pleasurable adventure for me. Catherine called me a strumpet, but I didn't care. I liked pleasing women, and each of them at some point said, "I like the way you do it." Catherine eventually got used to seeing or hearing about me with different women, and one day at Smitty's, she asked me out. "You know we were good together. Why not for old time's sake?" she asked. I couldn't go for it. "It wouldn't be the same. When we were together, everything I did for you was out of love. Now we'd just be using each other," I explained. "I understand," she said sorrowfully, and returned to her table. Finally, the day came when I was awarded the Napa franchise. The owner was true to his word and offered me a generous buyout. I had to take out a loan, but business was good and I wasn't worried about repayment. I had initially agreed to the deal for financial stability for Catherine and me. Now it would just be for me. That evening, I called Catherine and invited her to dinner. She agreed, and I made reservations at the best restaurant in town. I arranged for a car to pick her up and told her to dress appropriately. When she arrived, she looked radiant in a long black dress that highlighted her red hair and green eyes. I remembered why I married her. "You look amazing, Catherine," I said. "Thank you. You look very handsome in that tuxedo, too." "What's the occasion?" she asked. "I'm celebrating, and I wanted you to be the first to know," I replied. "Now I'm curious," she said. "Let's enjoy our meal first," I suggested. As we ate, our conversation grew more substantive. Finally, she asked, "What are you celebrating?" "Catherine, after we married, I worked as a mechanic. You seemed happy, but I felt stuck. When I told you about working at Napa for a flexible schedule, you blew up," I explained. "I remember," she said, lowering her gaze. "I did it for our family. It was all to make our lives better," I continued. "And I ruined it all," she said softly. "I didn't bring you here to relive bad memories. I signed the paperwork today to buy a Napa franchise with 4 stores," I revealed. She looked stunned. "This will ensure our children will have a large inheritance. They can either continue the franchise or sell it. Our grandchildren will benefit too." "I can't tell you how happy that makes me," I said. She started to cry. "I listened to Carl when he called you a failure with no ambition. I lost faith in you and ruined everything. You were a great husband, father, and lover, and I threw it all away. I'm sorry, Kurt. I hope you believe me. I'm sorry for everything I did that got us here," she said, her voice breaking. She got up from her chair, crying, and headed for the bathroom. A server followed her in. I had wanted tonight to be a celebration of future wealth for our children and grandchildren. I didn't expect my news to affect her so much. I felt sorry for her pain, but couldn't comfort her. I signaled the server for the check, knowing Catherine wouldn't want to continue the evening. When she returned, I stood and said, "I've already paid the bill. I can take you home." "Thank you. I'm sorry I ruined your evening," she said, tears still in her eyes. She cried quietly all the way home. I wanted to hug her, but couldn't risk sending the wrong message. At her apartment door, she looked at me as if inviting me in. "I'm sorry, Catherine, but we can't go back there," I said. She nodded and closed the door. The next couple of years were busy with business and many women. Word of mouth was the best advertising, and I always practiced safety. Catherine and I occasionally talked, especially about Kevin's engagement. He met Amber Williams at his store, and they quickly knew they were right for each other. On the day of the engagement party, I arrived early to help Kevin set up. We rented a room at the Sheraton and bought subs from Subway. As we finished, Catherine arrived. She still looked good after all these years. "We never had an engagement party, Kurt," she said. "No, but everyone we knew us," I replied. "Do you remember proposing to me?" she asked. "Yes, I do," I said. Sometimes I wanted to hurt her because she hurt me so much. I said I was sorry. "Can't we move on? It's been 3 years," she pleaded. "Today is about Kevin and Amber. Let's be cordial," I said. "Maybe we could be cordial from now on," she said in her usual demanding tone. Sometimes she seemed truly remorseful, and other times her old temper showed. Guests arrived, and Kevin and Amber greeted everyone. About 45 minutes in, I heard Amber call, "Mom!" I turned to see a beautiful woman in a floral sundress. She had blonde hair, deep blue eyes, and a smile that made my heart skip a beat. "Dad, that's Amber's mom, Alyssa. She's very religious and not into your lifestyle," Kevin said. "Kevin, before your mother left, I was a one-woman man. I want someone I can trust," I replied. "I don't know if she'd give you a chance, but I'll introduce you," he offered. "That would be great," I said. Kevin led me to Amber and her mother. "Mrs. Williams, this is my father, Kurt." "Kevin, you can call me Mom now," Alyssa said. Catherine walked up. "As long as he doesn't forget who his real mother is," she added. Kevin introduced Catherine to Alyssa, and they hugged and started talking. I walked away to avoid giving Alyssa a bad impression of me, hoping our first conversation would be positive. I mingled with friends and family, and many of the men joked about all the women I knew. Some women were aloof, but others were friendly. While talking to a divorced woman named Charisse, Catherine approached and warned her, "You better be careful with him. You never know what you might pick up." I got angry and said to Charisse, "Don't mind her. She's just mad I'm not giving her any mercy." "Kurt, you're a creep," Catherine retorted. "You're the one interfering in my conversations. Let's just be polite and keep our distance," I replied. Then I suggested to Charisse, "Want to take a walk and talk privately?" I didn't plan to pursue anything with Charisse that day, but wanted to get away from Catherine and annoy her. Charisse and I talked for a while and then parted ways, promising to talk again. About 2 hours into the party, I introduced myself to Alyssa. "So you're the infamous Kurt," she said with slight disdain. "I don't know what you've heard, but yes, I'm Kevin's father, Kurt," I replied. "Kevin seems like a fine young man. I hope he doesn't offend my Amber," she said. "He's a fine young man. He knows what he wants and works hard for it," I said proudly. "He'll build his business and love Amber just as much." "Well, I hope he stays faithful," she said bluntly. "He will. You have nothing to worry about," I assured her. "I hope so, for Amber's sake." "It's going to be a church wedding," she added. "Promises made before God and family," I said. "Look, it seems you've heard things about me. I'd like to clear the air and give you a chance to ask questions." "I've heard so many things," she said hesitantly. "We're going to be related. We should at least talk," I pleaded. "I think so, but this isn't the right place for it," she said. "Pick a time and place and I'll make it work," I offered. "Well, I live about an hour away. Tomorrow is Sunday and I'm going to church. Pick me up after and we'll go to Cracker Barrel." She gave me her church details. For the rest of the party, we exchanged subtle glances. I was a mystery to her. As the party wound down, Catherine approached me and said, "Amber is cute, but they're moving fast. Did you know they plan to marry within a year?" "Catherine, Kevin is smart. He knows what he wants. Meeting and marrying quickly can create problems, but we knew each other for years and still divorced. Commitment determines their success. I think they're committed." She looked regretful, knowing she had broken her commitment to our marriage. It still hurt, but I needed her to remember that. Sunday morning, I woke up early, shaved, showered, dressed in a nice suit, and drove to Alyssa's church. I arrived early and found a seat about a third of the way back. The sanctuary was different from the Catholic church I grew up in. No stained glass, altar, candles, or pulpit, just a raised platform with a blank cross. I felt out of place, but was determined to see it through. As people began entering the sanctuary, they were casually chatting and holding coffee cups from nearby coffee shops. They were dressed in jeans and casual tops, making me feel overdressed in my suit. Despite this, many people greeted me warmly, making me feel welcome. I kept looking for Alyssa, wondering if I had the wrong information or if she was sick. Then the minister announced the start of the service, and I saw her singing with the praise band. During the third song, she noticed me and smiled. She had a beautiful voice. After singing, she came over and sat next to me, which I appreciated since I wasn't sure what to do. "I didn't expect you to come to the service," she said. "I feel a bit out of place, overdressed for the occasion," I replied. "That's okay. You can take off your jacket if it makes you more comfortable," she suggested. I took off my jacket and laid it on the bench. "Thank you for sitting next to me," I said. "You're my guest. Of course I would," she responded. The service was different from what I was used to, but pleasant and relaxed. Afterward, Alyssa introduced me to the minister and several others as Amber's future father-in-law. At Cracker Barrel, we started with light conversation, but as we finished our meal, she got serious. "So, Kurt, I've heard you're a womanizer and sleep around a lot. What do you have to say?" she asked directly. "What's your definition of a womanizer?" I asked. "A guy who chases women, sleeps with them, and then dumps them," she replied. "By that definition, I'm not a womanizer," I said. "So what I've been told is a lie?" she accused. "Let me explain. I was married to Catherine, who you met. We were together over 25 years. She started cheating on me with her boss, and when I confronted her, she tried to eliminate me by setting my garage on fire. After our divorce, I started dating. Catherine likely talked about my abilities in the bedroom, and women approached me out of curiosity. I didn't chase them. I just said yes. For the past 2 years, I haven't turned down any woman who asked me out. I enjoyed their company and aimed to make them feel special. If you think that's wrong, I'm sorry." She looked at me with slight suspicion and asked, "So, where do I fit in?" "Alyssa, you're a beautiful woman. Like me, you've suffered. While I chose companionship, you closed yourself off from men because of your husband's actions. I'm looking for someone who can get to know me better and maybe date me. I'm a single man wanting to find someone to share my life with exclusively. What about your ex-wife? Didn't she want to get back together? Forgiving is possible, but forgetting isn't. You can't forget what they did. You lose trust in them, and without trust, there can't be a relationship." "I understand," she said. "My ex wanted me to look past it and stay married, but I couldn't. My self-esteem took a hit, and I wasn't going to let any man hurt me like that again." "We're similar in that way," I said. "I spent time with women, but never let them get close to me emotionally." She looked at me and nodded slightly. Then she repeated, "So where am I in all this?" "Well, we both have trust issues, but I'd like to get to know you better and see if there's a future for us," I said. "What about the other women?" she asked. "If we feel there's potential, I'd be happy to be exclusive with you," I replied. "Let me be upfront. I'm not doing anything until I'm married. If we're going to date, you need to understand that." I grinned. "Alyssa, I dated Catherine in high school and waited until we were married, so I'm fine with waiting." She seemed reassured. "Kurt, I appreciate your honesty. I think I like you. Let's see where this goes." For the next 4 months, we met at least twice a week. Sometimes she came to my place, and sometimes I went to hers. During this time, I still dated other women, but my interest in them waned. Charisse from the engagement party wanted more than I was willing to give. Her compliments, once boosting my ego, now started to bother me. One night at dinner, Alyssa told me she was ready to commit. I was overjoyed. "That makes me the happiest man on earth. I'm committing myself only to you. Honestly, the last 4 months have been meaningless when I wasn't with you. I love you." She hesitated, then said, "I think I'm falling in love with you too. Please be patient with me." I was patient both emotionally and physically. Then, one day, Catherine called. "Hi, Kurt," she said. "Hi, Catherine. How are you? What can I do for you?" "Wow, you're in a good mood." "Yes, I am. So what do you need?" I asked cheerfully. "Why don't we have dinner sometime? I have something to discuss with you." "Sure. How about tonight?" "That would be great. I'll make your favorite dish, roast beef with vegetables. Can you come over around 7? "Don't you want to go out to eat?" I asked. "No, I'd like to be alone with you." Okay, I'll see you then. Do you need anything? Maybe some wine to go with the roast beef? Okay, I'll pick something up. See you tonight. I hung up, curious but hesitant. I called Alyssa to let her know. She said, it must be about the wedding next month. She's trying to soften me up with roast beef, I said. Call me afterward and let me know, she replied. At 7 o'clock, I stood in front of Catherine's door with butterflies in my stomach. We chatted through most of dinner until she revealed the real reason she invited me. Kurt, Kevin's wedding made me think about us, she said quietly. There is no us, Catherine, I said. Ignoring me, she continued. Remember when we used to date and fool around? Yes, we were young, I said. We were good together, weren't we? Yes, we were, I agreed. What happened to us? She asked. Life, I guess, I said. I talked to Shannon at work. She said you were exactly what she needed. And Bethany said you're no longer making the rounds. Maybe you're tired of playing around. Okay, I said. Apparently neither Kevin nor Amber had told Catherine I was dating Alyssa. I smiled, thinking I appreciated their privacy. Catherine took that smile as agreement. So maybe we should try again. You know we were good together. I interrupted softly. Catherine, we were good together. But the key word is were. I need to forgive you. She smiled, but I continued. I forgive you, but I can never forget what you did. You need to move on with your life. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Oh, Kurt, I'm so sorry for what I did to you. To us. I really am. I know we can get over it. Let's try again. She wasn't giving up easily. I had to let her know it was over. I love someone else, Catherine. Bethany was right. I'm no longer playing around because I'm committed to someone. I've become a one-woman man again. She stared at me, then asked, Who is it? Alyssa, Amber's mom. Her shoulders slumped. She realized she couldn't get me back. We finished the meal in silence. As I left, I said, Catherine, thank you for dinner and the memories. I know this isn't what you wanted, but you'll find someone. Love him with all your heart. I couldn't stay mad at her anymore. Alyssa helped me forgive her, just as she forgave her ex. Their actions brought us together. Pulling away from Catherine's apartment, I called Alyssa. So, what was it? She asked. She wanted us to get back together. I thought so. She knows what she lost. Yeah, and I know what I found. Alyssa, I love you, and I'm better for it. I love you too, Kurt McCarthy, she said. It was the first time she said it out loud. I already knew she expressed her love in many ways, but it was nice to finally hear it. Kevin and Amber got married, and Alyssa and I smiled, held hands, and danced the whole time. Some joked we looked like a wedding couple. Catherine was there, but didn't stick around, likely finding it hard to see us so in love. 3 months later, we had a small private ceremony at our church. Friends and family attended, except Catherine. She claimed a scheduling conflict, but I think she just couldn't accept that I had moved on. It took her a few years, but she eventually found someone too. I hoped they'd last a long time. On our wedding night, Alyssa said the magic words, I love the way you do it. This time the emphasis was on love.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Gabrielle Winder sat in a quiet booth towards the back of Sackers, a local bar and grill just outside her hometown of Plainview, Arkansas, near Nimrod Lake. It was the 23rd of August. The time was 8:30. She knew the ritual. This was the 6th year in a row she had sat in this booth and waited for the clock to strike 8:39, so she could tell him all about the year and maybe say goodbye. Glancing slowly around the interior of the local watering hole, Jacob Billing, known locally as the Bear, plied his ministrations to the top of the White Oak Bar. He was the owner, bartender, and bouncer of the establishment. She looked past where he was standing, her eyes drawn to the methodical movement of color in the windows behind where he stood. For as long as Gabrielle could remember, the Budweiser sign, blaring its neon red greeting, had competed for attention with the blue and gold Coors sign in the front 2 windows. She always felt the 2 signs made the front of the place look like a weird Christmas display year-round. Her eyes returned to Bear, who at a glance seemed to be haphazardly running the rag in his hand over the flat surface, but upon closer inspection, one could pick up his careful, loving, almost tender care in everything he did for his establishment. Gabrielle chuckled a bit. Her father had told her once it was as if the bar was his wife, and he went about to ensure her happiness in all he did. She noticed the young kids in the first booth up by the bar as they got up to leave. Probably a summer romance. She took them both for no more than high school freshmen or sophomores. That left the guy in the booth 2 up and across from her as the only other person in the place. A stranger that wasn't at all unusual for this time of year. It was a very slow night, for which she was glad, sighing heavily. She sipped on her beer, the first legal one Bear had ever served her. Gabrielle was going into her senior year of high school when her life changed. She was just a youngster starting to grow into her womanhood back then. She had gone from being a shy, skinny kid with long, straight black shoulder-length hair and dark brown eyes, to the way her body had developed. Now at 24, her body was sleek and well-defined. She had worked hours at toning it. She was 5 feet 7 inches, 128 pounds, and although not model material, she would turn heads in any crowd. The raven black hair that flowed aimlessly to the middle of her back and dark brooding eyes were the only hints of her Cherokee Indian heritage, something she was, and always had been extremely proud of. As she sat in quiet contemplation, the memories came cascading back without provocation, hanging all about her like humidity on a hot summer day. She gave in, letting herself drift back to that night 6 years ago. "Grebs, wait up," she heard her best friend Kirsten Tinnery yell over to her. "Well, hurry up, slowpoke," she laughingly replied. Kirsten, he had been her best friend and buddy since his family had moved into the farm across the road from her family when they were both 6. Grebs was his very own private nickname for her, and she would only allow him to call her that. Kirsten was a likable guy, though a tad bit skinny. He was actually well-muscled at 5 feet 11 inches, 175 pounds, light brown hair and sparkling hazel eyes. He and Gabrielle had done everything together, growing up, fishing, hunting, cooking, cleaning house, playing baseball, basketball and tennis, as well as playing card games. They had joined 4-H, learned to ride horses and care for livestock together, and with their parents, who were also good friends, had hiked, camped, canoed, and learned about nature with each other. During the summer, both kids looked forward to the family campouts at Nimrod Lake. Only 5 or 6 miles from their houses, the lake offered the friends time to explore and discover a completely new universe in the paradise setting. That special year had been a turning point in their relationship. They were both preparing to enter their sophomore year of HS in the fall. By June, they realized they had fallen in love with the other. Both of them understood that what they now felt towards each other was much deeper and richer than it had ever been before. Their parents were supportive of the relationship once they discovered their kids had become an item. Not one of the parents understood exactly how deep the bond between their children had become. Kirsten was the first guy to hold Gabrielle's hand, the first to hold her and whisper lovers' secrets in her ear, giving her the first kiss as well as her first French kiss. In early August of that same year, they shared themselves with one another for the very first time and became lovers, happening as it did out in the Tinnery's field, under their favorite tree. Kirsten, true to form, had held her after that first time, reassuring her of his love, after which he asked her in all truthfulness if this meant he could take her to homecoming in October and prom in the spring. Then before she could answer, he asked if this meant they were going steady. When she said yes to all three, all the boy could do was grin ear to ear. She thought it was so cute. By the evening of the August 23rd, the young lovers had been together 4 times. They had made some time to be together that day, and for some reason it had seemed very special, almost as if they had become one that afternoon. Since the two families were enjoying the last week-long campout by the lake of the summer, they asked their parents if they could go up to Sackers for a root beer. Her dad said, "Okay." As they walked towards the small bridge that separated the campsites from the bar and grill area, Kirsten stopped and kissed Gabrielle. There was raw passion in that kiss mixed with unbelievable tenderness. "When they broke," Gabrielle asked, "Not that I mind, but what was that for?" "Ever since we made love today. I can't believe how close to you I feel, how special it was today. I mean, every time has been wonderful, but today was so beautiful, so I wanted to just crawl inside your skin and be part of you." Kirsten's smile lit up her whole world. She brushed the hair out of his eyes. "I know it was that way for me too today." She kissed him again, just to watch his eyes sparkle. Just as they crossed a bridge about a quarter-mile from the bar, Kirsten kissed her again. Then they exchanged "I love yous," and he said, "I have to pee. You go on ahead. I'll catch up in a moment." She walked aimlessly along the river path towards the bar, the low-hanging branches brushing against her head and face. She waved to Betsy, Mr. Bear's niece, as she sat on the back steps of the tavern. Gabrielle suddenly screamed as a pair of rough hands grabbed her. "Looky what I got, Tommy. After we knock over the store, we have something to play with tonight." A sickly voice resounded in her ear. Another voice said, "Look on the steps." Another one. Gabrielle bit the hand over her mouth and screamed, "Becky, run, get help, hurry." At the same time, her captor yelled, "You little witch." She watched a hand move towards her face, and remembers hearing Kirsten's voice. He was screaming something, then all was black. Gabrielle woke up in the hospital about an hour later. Her mom and dad were with her, comforting her. She had asked, "Where's Kirsten?" Her mom got a funny look on her face and looked up at her dad, who swallowed very hard. Fear gripped Gabrielle's mind. She started shaking her head side to side and asked again in a tear-filled voice, "Where is my Kirsten? Daddy, where is he?" Her father took her in his arms and held her. "Baby, he was shot and killed by the men that attacked you tonight. He was protecting his friend, the girl he loved." "I'm so sorry, honey." Jabrielle tried to understand. She tried to speak. But her mouth wouldn't work except to cry as she held her daddy and her mommy as they put their arms around her to comfort her in her time of loss. Sometime later that night, Kirsten's mom and dad came in, and all Jabrielle could do was hold them and cry some more. At that moment, no one realized how devastating the loss would be. Jabrielle was shaking as she brought herself back to the present. She glanced around. No one was looking at her. She was weeping quietly. Looking at her watch, she noted she still had 5 minutes. She sighed and let her mind wander back. She remembered that over the next month, she slowly pieced together the circumstances of the next few minutes after she was rendered unconscious. Becky told her, "You yelled, then the guy holding you punched you in the head and you fell to the ground. One of the guys started coming towards me when Kirsten charged them with a boat, or he picked up from a rowboat someone tied up near the path. He yelled, 'Get away from them,' then smacked the guy charging me in the head with the oar, giving me the time I needed to get inside and get my uncle." Mr. Bear told her he responded to his niece's screams by grabbing a shotgun. Then he sent 2 of his customers whom he knew had rifles in their cars to get them and circle either side of the bar. Watching through the back window, he saw Kirsten charge the remaining 2 men, smacking the first man, the one who they later learned had hit you, with the shank of the oar on his knee, then twirled around hitting the last guy in the ribs with the edge of the paddle. His attacks were startling and brutal, as both of those men moved as rapidly as they could down the path away from the 2 of you. Kirsten glanced quickly around. Finding no more danger, he dropped the paddle, then started to bend down towards you. He suddenly stopped and seemed to stiffen, then stood up and took a step towards the bar. Mr. Bear continued, a catch in his voice clearly evident. I looked down in horror and saw the first guy who Kirsten had saved Becky from. He was now standing, his right hand covering a bloody wound on the side of his head that he had received a moment earlier. His left arm outstretched pointing towards Kirsten. The man was holding a gun. Kirsten took a step towards him. "I think to get between you and the gunman." The man screamed something and then fired twice. Both bullets struck him in the stomach. I moved to grab the doorknob and glanced at the clock. It was 8:39. Then I flung the back door open. The guy that had shot Kirsten looked up the steps at me, then started to swing his gun towards me. I unloaded both barrels into his head and chest. He didn't have a chance. As I started to move out to get to Kirsten, who was now on his knees and one arm holding himself up, his other arm around his stomach, suddenly 2 bullets slammed into the doorframe beside me. It seemed the other 2 goons were shooting at me. I moved back into the bar. The all boys I had sent out to get their guns opened fire with their hunting rifles while I reloaded the shotgun. There was a long silence as a lone "I give up" echoed into the night, and one of the 2 remaining rowdies came into the light with his hands on his head. We quickly found out that one of the fellows with the rifles had found his mark. 2 of them were now dead. No one moved for a second, and then the night lit up with the sounds of sirens. It seems Becky had called the sheriff. One of my buddies took control of the man who had surrendered. "Becky and I got to you too a moment later. Kirsten had just said something to you. I've been over pulling him up on his knees, leaned him into my chest so Becky could get some of the towel she had brought onto the wounds to stop the blood flow. He looked up and asked me to tell you goodbye, and that he both loved you and knew you loved him. Your parents had heard the ruckus at your campsite, came running up to us just as the sheriff arrived. He lasted until 8:51, but he got to say I love you and his goodbyes to his parents. They were holding him when he died. Your parents got to you by then. They were cradling you as life left him. He was holding your hand when he died, honey, bear," concluded his story. Jabrielle opened her eyes as she whispered, "Kirsten, I wish you would have held on so I could have said goodbye." It was 8:39. She felt a twinge of regret, but for some reason she was more comforted this year than before. Oh well, she thought. Time heals all wounds. She sat and told him all about the year, the goings-on in her house and his parents' house, including the wonderful news that his parents had been approved to adopt the twins they had been foster parents to for the last 3 years. Also, wonder of wonders, his mom had allowed her to go into Kirsten's old room, box up everything, repaint, and redecorate it since the twins were girls. Running out of things to say, she just sat and thought about her bestest friend and how much she missed him. Then it was over, at least for another year. She could go on with her life. Becky waited until Jabrielle sighed and started to lift her head, then slid into the bench across the booth from Jabrielle, who looked up with tear-stained cheeks and smiled at her friend. Becky said, "Hi. Hi yourself. You okay now?" "Yeah, for another year." "Jabrielle, I've been here with you for 6 years. You've never told me why you can't move on." "I've asked myself that exact same thing for 6 years, Becky. I was the only one who didn't get to say goodbye, to see him go. I'll not see him again to say it until I cross over, at the end of my life. I know it's stupid, but I want it. No needed to say goodbye. Trust me, Becky, it's getting easier to live life afterwards. But I am healing." Jabrielle smiled at her friend. "I'll see you tomorrow for breakfast," Becky remarked. "Gotta get home to my hubby." Getting up to leave, she went out the back door to where her truck was parked and left. Jabrielle sighed and allowed her head to fall into her hands, elbows on the table, tears flowing easily as she felt him with her once again. Sitting with her head in her hands, She didn't see the two drunken college boys come in to get a couple of 12-packs or that they noticed her. Bear was outside making sure the remaining 6 college rowdies all stayed in the truck, while Carla, the regular night shift girl, was watching the cash drawer and filling orders. The two Romeos staggered over and sat down with Gabrielle, one sliding in across from her, the other one next to her, moving his arm around her shoulders. He pulled her close to him. Startled, she gave out a cry. "What the hell do you want? Get your arm off of me. Get out of here and leave me alone." She was absolutely flabbergasted at the man's gall. The man across the table slurred out, "Ah, come on, honey. You don't need to cry over him. We'll make everything all better. Now quit playing hard to get." He winked at the guy who was still holding her. "First, get off of me." Poking the guy in the ribs, he moved his arm as she pushed him out of the booth and onto the floor. "Second, that is the worst Southern drawl and pickup line I've ever heard. Third, get out of here and leave me alone." Both men got real quiet. Then the guy who was sitting across from her snapped his hand and slapped her hard on her cheek. The unexpected move had Gabrielle back on her heels, so to speak, and she moved into the corner of the booth, her arms close to her body, her hands up near her face guarding. The man who had been deposited on the floor crawled back up from the floor, putting his knee on the booth seat. "So you like it rough, which, well, I like it rough too." He spit the words out like they were physical barbs, then lunged at Gabrielle. She screamed, "No." The man stopped inches from Gabrielle's face, then staring at her in obvious pain, mouth hanging open. No words coming from the evil-smelling canyon that now dominated his face. He seemed to be frozen in place. He slowly slid backwards to the end of the booth. The man let out a low groan of pain mixed with terror, whispering, "My balls! Oh my God! He's got me by the balls." He lowered his head to the bench and just shook. Gabrielle looked up to see a tall man of average build. He had a gentle look in his eyes, she noticed as he met her gaze briefly. He smiled, then nodded back at her. He looked at the rapidly sobering man sitting across from her. The tall man's voice was firm but had a distinct edge to it. "Okay, boys. This lady has made it very clear she doesn't want your attention. Furthermore, she has asked you, not once, but twice, to leave her alone. So, I'll leave the gruesome details to your imagination if you decide to challenge. Now get lost." The stranger released his grasp, then slammed his fist back between his buddy's legs. The man lurched forward and slid down under the table, as a low, almost inaudible groan tumbled from his lips. The guy across the table from Gabrielle jumped up to grab the stranger, was met with a hard, well-placed left jab that landed on the bridge of his nose, splattering blood over both of the antagonists, as the drunk student fell limply back onto the bench. The stranger looked at Gabrielle. "Sorry about the mess, ma'am. It would probably be best if you got another seat after I escort our two guests out to their car." All Gabrielle could do was nod her head in agreement. The man gathered the two goons, then drug and pushed them to the bar, where they picked up the two 12-packs of beer, then manhandled them to their awaiting truck. The boys took off out of the parking lot only to be immediately pulled over by not one, but 3 sheriff's cars. It seemed Carla made a phone call to alert them. When the man came back inside, Carla handed him a wet rag to clean himself off. He handed the cloth back when he was finished, nodding to the woman in thanks. He found that he had a friend sitting at his booth. "Gabrielle," she introduced herself, as she shook his hand. The man mumbled something that sounded like "Kenny," as he stared at her with big doe eyes. Gabrielle smiled. The man's gentleness disarmed her. She found him easy to talk to, and was amazed at how quickly he drew her in, as she ended up telling him all about Curson. He seemed amazed at the depth of commitment the two had for each other. When he said, "I am truly sorry for the loss all the people involved incurred," she didn't know why, but she felt he really meant it. As the bar closed down, Gabrielle asked where his car was parked. He pointed to a late 90s model Mustang. She turned and asked Kenny if he would mind giving her a ride home. Her raw emotions, coupled with the beer she had, were too much to risk the drive. As they drove along, she pointed out the house where Curson had lived. Kenny studied the place with genuine interest. Surprisingly, he pulled into her parents' driveway before she told him where it was. He had walked her to her door when she politely asked, "Would you like to come in?" Standing off to the right side of the porch, with a sad, faraway look in his eyes, he replied, "I don't think I'm allowed." Gabrielle stood by the front door a bit, dumbfounded by his answer, then noticed a tear running down his cheek. "You okay?" she asked softly. He nodded, then sighed. "Well, do you like the way I would have looked? I guess this is about what I should have been like at our age now." She stared at the man in front of her. "What do you mean?" she asked, confusion apparent in her voice. The man looked at her, emotion readily apparent on his face as he gushed. "I have missed you so much, Grebs, and I didn't mean to leave you that night, especially without saying goodbye. I don't know what you did, but they sent me back for just a few brief spans of time, and that allotment is growing short. Oh my Grebs." The man both sighed and let out a soft sob. As he continued, "The Lord knows, I love you so much." An impossible hope sprang up in Gabrielle as she saw the man in front of her for who he was. Moving quickly towards him, she grabbed him and fell into his embrace, then pulled him down to her, and her lips touched his, Both of them were lost in the moment. When they broke, she looked into his eyes. Curson, it's really you. You're here holding me. How? How is that possible? I don't know, but I think it's so we can say a proper goodbye to each other. I didn't get to leave anything else for you, so, he grinned. The way Gabrielle had always loved, the little boy caught look. The night air, which had been hot and stifling, was suddenly cool and refreshing as she looked up at him. It suddenly occurred to her she had something very special to show to him. Curson, I need to go get something. If I run inside to get it, will you still be here when I get back? He thought and acted as if he were listening to something, then nodded yes and said, hurry. Gabrielle flew into the house, opened her parents' bedroom door without knocking. Her mom and dad, who were both reading, looked up at their wild-eyed daughter. No time to explain. Call Mom and Dad Tinnery. Tell them they have to get over here in the next 2 to 3 minutes. There is a miracle standing on our front porch. Hurry. As she left the room, her father grabbed the telephone. Something in her voice told him don't ask. After calling them, he and his wife scrambled out of their bed, threw on their robes, then headed downstairs. They saw their daughter fly out the front door in front of them. Now, why did she get him up, they wondered. Curson was stunned when Gabrielle returned, the screen door slamming shut behind her. She was holding a child. A boy by the looks of him, around 5 or 6. Curson noticed Grebs was shaking as she moved across the old banister front porch towards him. It still needs painting, flickered across his mind. Gabrielle sat down on the porch. The sleepy child hugged his mother. You did leave me something, Curson. You left me our son, growing in my womb. And this beautiful little boy is Curson Winder Tinnery, your son, my love. Our son. Curson was speechless, but then no more than Greb's parents, who had emerged from the house and were now standing on their porch, staring at a young man on their front porch that had been murdered 6 years ago that very night. Curson looked at both of them. Could I have a hug? I need to say goodbye, and I don't have very long. Both of the Winders moved slowly past their daughter and grandson to face him. Mrs. Winder grabbed Curson, followed in short order by her husband. After a few moments in the embrace, Mrs. Winder remarked, Now, my boy, go meet your son. He asks about you a lot. Curson nodded and knelt down in front of Gabrielle and reached out a trembling hand to touch his son. The child looked up at the man in front of him. Are you my real daddy? Curson replied, Yes, son. I am your daddy. Curson put out his arms, allowing his son to come to him for their first embrace. His son held him, smiling. I prayed to God for a long time to send you back and help Mommy not to be sad anymore, so she can be happy like me. I know a bad man hurt you, and God has to have you in heaven so you won't hurt. I love you, Daddy, and I will take care of Mommy for you. Curson thought he sounded so grown up. He was very proud of his son. My son, my precious child. I love you too, and I love your Mommy so very much. Thank you for taking care of her because I can't. But don't worry, I will watch over both of you, even when you can't see me or hear me. Now let me tell you a secret only we can know. Promise. Promise, the child replied, making an exaggerated X over his little chest. Curson smiled and returned the gesture. I promise you, when it's time for Mommy to go be with God, a long time from now, I will come to her and take her to heaven, okay? Okay, Daddy, came his proud answer. Now I need you to go to Grandma and Grandpa, because I need to give your Mommy and my wife enough loving to last until the end of her life. Kissing each other, father and son separated with, I love you, and goodbye, exchanged for the last time this side of eternity. Grabbing his love, while still sitting on the porch, they both held on to each other, allowing the moment to fill them to the brim, feeling 2 more sets of arms enfold him. He looked up into the shocked faces. Mama, Daddy, he said as his parents were also allowed to partake of the miracle of a child's faith. For a few brief moments of time, 3 families said the things to each other that are necessary for healing. Then at Curson's insistence, final goodbyes spoken, hugs and kisses exchanged. Gabrielle took Curson's hand and walked with him towards the road, knowing it would be their last walk for a while. Kissing her fiercely, Curson took his love in his arms. Grebs, I want you to get out and experience life. All it has to give. Find the things you want to do. Go to the places you want to see. Find love, accept it in return. Give of yourself as much as you can. But remember, when it's all over, I'm coming to get you. And for a long time, we will share each other with just God, because I'm waiting for you. They kissed one last time, then looking deeply into each other's eyes, said goodbye. Gabrielle hugged him and closed her eyes. After she felt his arms go limp from around her, she stepped back away from him. A few moments later, she slowly opened her eyes, looking around, and he was gone. Sighing, she heard the door on the mailbox creak. Going over, she looked inside to find 6 envelopes, one addressed to each of the 6 people in the 2 families. No one would ever reveal to the others what he had written to them. No one ever asked. Gabrielle grabbed the letters. As she turned towards the house, she heard his voice on the wind near her ear. Goodbye. I love you, Grebs. A single tear fell down her cheek. I love you too, my Curson. Thank you. Goodbye. She heard him sigh, and then the sounds of the night came rushing back into her mind. She stood and cried for a few minutes. Only there was no sadness, only joy. It filled her so completely. She had to let it out and tears seemed so appropriate. Looking eastward, she saw the first light of the dawn of a brand new day break the horizon. Her heart was light, as were her footsteps. She turned and walked towards the house, ready to face a future that was suddenly bright with promise. Epilogue. 2 weeks after her 83rd birthday, Betrayal lay in her hospital bed, her body failing, waiting patiently for her best friend to come and escort her to her new home. Her oldest child, Kirsten, now 65, was in the room, talking and reading stories to his mom as she rested. He looked up as the door to the room opened to find his father standing there, looking much as he remembered him from all those years before. Kirsten stood. His dad said, "Hi. Sorry you can't hug me. I don't have a physical body for this trip." "I understand, Dad. Thanks for watching out for your mom for me. I love you for it all the more." "You're welcome, Dad. I want to know something. Will you?" The embarrassment shone on his face. "Son, we will both come back for you and your lovely bride. But right now your mom and I have a date, so tell her goodbye." Mother and son said their piece to each other. Returning to his seat near the window, he watched as his father moved over by the bed. Kirsten looked at Gabrielle. He had a huge smile on his face. "You ready?" "Yes, love. I've waited patiently for you, for such a long time." Taking his best friend by her hand, Kirsten gently pulled Gabrielle up from the bed towards himself. Their son watched in awe as a spirit of his mother stood from within her body. She looked to be 20 years old. The two lovers embraced, said goodbye to their child. Then they slipped out the door as the cardiac monitors blared their trumpet call, another person freed to eternity. Kirsten sat in the chair in the corner of the room as the hospital staff made a valiant effort to save the old woman. The doctor finally said, "It's too late." Kirsten distinctly heard, "Grebs, wait up," followed by, "Well, hurry up, slowpoke," and the laughter of little children as they run through the meadows on hot summer days fading away in the distance. Kirsten smiled, gathered his things to go sign the appropriate paperwork, make the phone calls to his 3 half-siblings, then get home and try to explain this to his wife. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Right now, it feels like my life has been torn apart and I'm barely holding it together. I just need to get this off my chest, even if it's to strangers on the internet. For almost 30 years, I thought I had the kind of life that most people dream of. I married my wife, Linda, when we were young. She was 20, and I was 22. We were broken, but we were happy. We built our life together from the ground up, raising 2 daughters, Betty and Maria, who meant everything to me. Betty, my oldest at 26, has always been the overachiever, valedictorian in high school, graduated at the top of her college class, and now she's getting married this fall to her longtime boyfriend. Maria, my youngest at 24, is the carefree one. She's sweet, always smiling, and has been incredibly close to me since she was little. I always thought I had a great relationship with both of them. Linda and I had a solid marriage. At least, that's what I thought. Sure, we had our ups and downs, financial struggles when the kids were young, arguments now and then, health scares, but through it all, we stuck together. I truly believed we were a team, and I imagined us growing old together, sitting on the porch, reminiscing about our younger days. I loved her with everything I had. Then last week, everything fell apart. It started like any other weekday. Linda told me she was going out for dinner with Betty and Maria. They do this regularly, every couple of weeks, girls' dinner, as they call it. It's their time to catch up, laugh, and talk about things they don't want to share with me. I never minded. In fact, I loved that they were close. It made me proud as a husband and father, like I'd done something right in raising a family that loved each other so much. That night, Linda was upstairs getting ready, and I was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through the news on my phone. I can remember it so clearly, the sound of her phone buzzing on the counter. It wasn't unusual. She gets messages from the girls all the time, especially when they're making plans. Without thinking, I picked it up. I'm not proud of what I did next. I didn't have any reason to be suspicious, but something made me open the message. It was from an unsaved number. The message read, "Can't wait to see you tonight." I froze. My first reaction was confusion. This couldn't be right. It had to be a mistake. Or maybe it wasn't what it looked like. I stared at the message for what felt like forever, my mind racing. Finally, I tapped on the thread to see the rest of the conversation. What I found shattered me. The messages weren't long, but they didn't need to be. They told me everything I needed to know. The texts were from her boss, and they were making plans to meet for dinner. But it was clear this wasn't just a business dinner. The tone of the messages was flirty, affectionate. There were texts from earlier that week, like, "I miss you." "Once a week isn't enough." Linda replied, "I miss you too." My stomach turned. My heart started racing. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped the phone. This was my wife, the woman I'd built my life with, the mother of my children. She was having an affair. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to march upstairs and confront her right then and there, but I couldn't. I was in shock, still trying to process what I'd just seen. I needed more information. I needed to be absolutely sure. A few minutes later, Linda came downstairs, dressed up and looking as beautiful as ever. She smiled at me, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "Don't wait up, okay?" Her voice was so casual, so warm, as if everything was completely normal. I don't know how I kept my composure, but I managed to say, "Have fun with the girls." As soon as she walked out the door, I grabbed her phone and turned on location sharing. I'd never done anything like that before. I'd never felt the need to spy on her, or anyone else for that matter. But in that moment, I didn't care. I needed to know the truth. I sat there for a while, staring at my phone, waiting for her location to update. When it finally did, my heart sank even further. She wasn't heading to the restaurant where she and the girls usually met. Instead, she was going somewhere else, a place we'd been to many times as a family. I quickly texted Betty and Maria. "What time are you meeting Mom for dinner?" Both of them responded almost immediately. Betty said, 7 o'clock. Can't wait to see her. And Maria said something similar. They were lying. My own daughters were lying to me. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it, but at that moment, I knew Linda wasn't the only one betraying me. My daughters were part of it too. I waited a little longer, watching Linda's location. She finally arrived at the restaurant. My heart pounding, I grabbed my car keys and drove there. When I got to the restaurant, I parked outside and looked through the window. It didn't take long to spot her. She was sitting at a table near the back with her boss. They were holding hands, laughing, completely unaware that I was watching them. It felt like a knife in my chest. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of them. I don't even know why I did it, maybe to prove to myself that it was real, that I wasn't imagining things. Then I drove away, sitting in my car, staring at the picture of my wife with another man. A wave of emotions hit me. Anger, sadness, disbelief. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to face her, how to confront her. So I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I opened our family group chat and sent the picture. Just the picture with a simple caption. "Glad you're enjoying girls' dinner?" Then I turned off my phone and drove to my brother's house. I wasn't ready to deal with the fallout. I couldn't face it yet. That night, I lay awake in my brother's guest room, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how my life had fallen apart so quickly. I had always thought of myself as a good husband, a good father, but now I wasn't so sure. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family, felt like a lie. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. After I sent the photo to the family group chat and turned off my phone, I drove aimlessly for a while before finally pulling into my brother's driveway. It was late, but he let me in without asking too many questions. He could tell something was wrong. I guess it was written all over my face. I didn't tell him everything. I just said I needed a place to crash for the night. He offered me a beer, but I wasn't in the mood. I just wanted to be alone. I spent the night on his couch, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind was racing, replaying everything that had happened in the past few hours. I couldn't stop thinking about seeing them together in the restaurant. The way Linda smiled at her boss, the way they leaned in close, holding hands like teenagers in love. It made me sick. How long had this been going on? How had I been so blind? And then there was Betty and Maria. The way they lied to me so casually, like it was nothing. I raised them to be honest, to have integrity, yet here they were, helping their mother cover up an affair. It felt like a betrayal on an entirely different level. The next morning, I finally turned my phone back on. It immediately lit up with notifications, texts, missed calls, voicemails. Linda had called me dozens of times, and Betty and Maria had texted me as well. I didn't have the strength to go through everything at once, so I skimmed through the messages. Linda's messages were exactly what I expected. "Please call me. I can explain. It's not what you think. We need to talk." I couldn't bring myself to listen to her voicemails. I knew hearing her voice would only make me angrier. Maria's messages were different. She sent me text after text, apologizing profusely. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I never should have lied to you. I hate myself for what I did. Please don't hate me. Can we please talk? I'm so scared I've ruined everything." She even had her boyfriend, Josh, text me. "Hey, this is Josh. Maria's really upset and having a panic attack. She's scared you'll never forgive her. Please call her." I didn't reply to any of them. I didn't know what to say. Betty, on the other hand, was a different story. Her text was short and cold. "Dad, I'm sorry you found out this way, but I think you're overreacting. Don't throw away a good marriage over one mistake. Overreacting? One mistake? My blood boiled. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a full-blown betrayal, not only by Linda, but by Betty and Maria too. They had lied to me. They had helped their mother cover up something that completely shattered our family. I couldn't help but replay all the times they must have lied to my face. Every time I asked about their plans, they'd tell me they were going to dinner, knowing full well what Linda was really doing. They'd smile at me, acting like everything was normal, all while hiding the truth. I spent most of the day stewing in my anger and heartbreak. My brother tried to talk to me, but I wasn't ready to open up yet. I needed time to process everything. By the afternoon, I realized I couldn't let this go without saying something. I started by texting Maria. Maria, I love you, but what you've done has hurt me deeply. I need space to figure things out. She replied almost instantly. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'll never forgive myself for this. I love you so much. I didn't respond. Then, I texted Betty. Betty, this isn't a mistake. This is a betrayal from my entire family. Please don't contact me until I'm ready to talk. She didn't reply, but I knew she must have shown Linda because, shortly after, Linda started texting me again. Don't take this out on the girls. They were just trying to protect me. They didn't mean to hurt you. I ignored her. I wasn't interested in excuses. Later that evening, I finally told my brother the full story. I showed him the messages, the photo, everything. He was furious on my behalf. You need to cut them all off, he said. They clearly don't respect you. Why should you keep them in your life? His words hit me hard because deep down, I knew he was right. But cutting off my daughters? That was a step I wasn't sure I could take. That night, I started thinking about what came next. I knew my marriage to Linda was over. There was no coming back from this, and honestly, I didn't even want to try. But what about Betty and Maria? Could I ever trust them again? Could I ever look at them the same way, knowing what they did? I decided I needed time. Time to think, time to process, time to figure out how to move forward. But one thing was certain. My life, as I knew it, was over. The fallout didn't hit like an explosion. It lingered, a slow, suffocating burn. By the time I got back to my brother's place that evening, I wasn't angry anymore. I was numb. All the emotions I had felt earlier, the rage, the disbelief, the heartbreak, had given way to a dull, crushing weight in my chest. It felt like the life I had built, the one I thought was solid, was crumbling, and all I could do was watch. The first thing I noticed when I turned on my phone was the silence. Earlier, it had been full of frantic notifications, missed calls, and texts. But now, there was nothing. No more desperate messages from Maria. No follow-ups from Betty. No voice messages from Linda. It was like they had finally realized I wasn't going to respond and had given up, or maybe they were regrouping. Who knows? Either way, the silence was unsettling. The quiet gave me time to think, and that wasn't a good thing. When the anger faded, all that was left was the hurt, the questions that kept swirling in my mind like a tornado. How long had this been going on? How many times had Linda lied to my face? Did Betty and Maria ever feel guilty about what they were doing? Or was this just normal for them? Betraying their father to protect their mother? That night, after hours of silence and stewing in my thoughts, I finally sat down with my brother in his living room. I knew I couldn't carry this weight alone anymore, so I decided to tell him everything, to finally let it all out. I needed someone to hear me, to listen without judgment, even if there was nothing anyone could do to fix it. I sat across from him, my hands trembling slightly as I began. The weight of the betrayal felt heavy on my chest, but I pushed through. I found something on Linda's phone. I started, my voice steady but thick with emotion. Text messages, lies. I couldn't ignore it, and it led me to something else. My brother didn't interrupt, just gave me a nod, silently urging me to keep going. I told him everything, the text between Linda and her boss, the lies Betty and Maria had told me, the way they'd all covered up what Linda was doing. I even told him about the picture I'd taken of Linda and her boss at the restaurant, how I just stood there watching them, the feeling in my gut sinking deeper with every passing second. I couldn't take it anymore, I said, swallowing hard. I sent the picture to the family group chat. I didn't even care anymore. I just needed them to know, to see what was really going on. My brother leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face, a deep frown forming on his face. I could see the anger in his eyes as he processed what I just said. He didn't speak right away, just let the silence hang between us. That's messed up, he finally said, his voice tight with frustration. I don't even know where to start. I mean, I always thought Linda was, a little too polished, too perfect, but I didn't think she'd do something like this. And the girls, man, he shook his head, his voice quiet with disbelief. I don't know. It's low. His words, though filled with anger, gave me a small sense of relief. I needed to hear that I wasn't going crazy, that I wasn't losing my mind. It wasn't just me seeing things through a fog of rage and confusion. Someone else saw it too. But even though he was angry on my behalf, it didn't make the situation any easier. It didn't take away the pain, the betrayal. My brother's anger was helpful for a moment, but it was mine that had been festering for hours. I don't know what to do, man, I admitted, my voice breaking slightly. I can't even look at them the same way anymore. I don't even want to go back to that house. I feel like everything's falling apart. My marriage is over, and now, I can't even trust my daughters. They lied to me. They helped her cover it all up. My brother stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to figure out what to say, how to help. He wasn't sure either. You need to cut them all off, he said finally, his voice low but firm. They clearly don't respect you. Why should you keep them in your life? His words hit hard, and I felt a stab of guilt. Could I really cut them out like that? Could I just walk away from my family? It felt impossible. But deep down, I knew he was right. They had all betrayed me in different ways. The trust one once had in them was shattered beyond repair. I don't know, I muttered, feeling defeated. Cutting them off. I'm not sure I can do that. Not with Betty and Maria. They're still my daughters. My brother nodded, understanding, but the frustration was still clear in his face. I get it, he said, but you can't let them walk all over you. Not like this. You need to take a step back and think about what's best for you. What about you, man? What are you going to do? I didn't have an answer. Not yet, anyway. I had so many questions swirling in my head, so many emotions crashing against each other. I didn't even know where to start. I need time, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I need time to think, to figure this all out. I can't just go back to normal like nothing happened. This isn't just a mistake. It's betrayal. And I don't know how to handle that. My brother didn't offer me any easy solutions. He didn't tell me what to do. He just sat with me, letting the silence settle, understanding that there was nothing to fix right away. It wasn't about finding an immediate answer. It was about giving myself the space to process what had happened, to figure out where to go from here. The next morning, I decided it was time to stop wallowing in my anger and start taking action. The first thing I needed to do was get my finances in order. I couldn't afford to focus on the emotional mess if I didn't protect myself first. So, I spent the majority of the day canceling joint accounts, transferring money into a separate account Linda couldn't touch, and securing anything that could be at risk in the divorce. I wasn't going to let her use my grief as an opportunity to catch me off guard. But it wasn't just about Linda. As I reviewed my accounts, I couldn't stop thinking about the tens of thousands of dollars I had spent, money I had saved up for Betty's wedding. All that money, gone. For a daughter who had lied to my face and helped her mother betray me. The thought made me sick to my stomach. I made a note to discuss this with my lawyer. Maybe I couldn't get that money back, but I sure as hell wasn't going to spend another cent on them. By the afternoon, I felt ready to move on to the next step. I called a lawyer. Actually, I called several. My brother had advised me to meet with a few before making a choice. So, I spent the rest of the day in law offices, retelling my story to strangers who tried their hardest to stay professional, but I could see the judgment in their eyes. By the end of the day, I had made my decision. I picked someone who was tough, smart, and most importantly, aggressive. I told her I wanted the divorce to be quick and clean, but I also wanted to make sure Linda didn't get anything she didn't deserve. She reassured me, claiming she had handled plenty of cases like this. While it didn't completely ease my mind, at least I felt like I was in capable hands. That night, as I sat alone in my brother's guest room, I started thinking about what I would say to Linda. I hadn't confronted her yet, mostly because I didn't trust myself to stay calm, and because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of an explanation. What could she possibly say that would make any of this okay? But I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. Eventually, I'd have to face her, and when that moment came, I wanted to be prepared. I couldn't let myself get drawn into her excuses or her tears. I needed to stay focused and remind myself of why I was doing this. So, I wrote everything down, the questions I wanted to ask, the points I needed to make, all the emotions I hadn't yet processed. I wasn't sure if I'd actually say everything I'd written, but putting it on paper gave me a sense of control, like I wasn't just a passive victim in all of this. The hardest part, though, was thinking about Betty and Maria. I hadn't spoken to them since sending those texts, and I wasn't sure I could. How do you talk to your daughters after learning they've been lying to you for months? How do you even begin to rebuild trust after something like that? I wanted to believe Maria's apologies were sincere, that she was truly sorry for her role in all of this, but how could I trust her? How could I believe anything she said after everything I'd uncovered? And Betty, her cold, dismissive response cut me to the core. I'd always known she was closer to Linda, but I never imagined she'd take her side in something this serious. It felt like she had made her choice, and it wasn't me. That night, I made another decision. I wasn't going to reach out to them. If they wanted to fix things, they'd have to come to me. I wasn't going to chase after them, begging for their forgiveness or explanations. They made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of calm for the first time since everything had exploded. I didn't feel completely lost anymore. I had a plan. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. I was done being the victim. From now on, I was going to take control. After 2 days of hiding out in my brother's guest room, dodging calls and sorting through my emotions, I knew it was time to face Linda. Avoiding her wouldn't change anything, and I had things I needed to say. Things she needed to hear. I sent her a text late that night. "We need to talk tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the house." She replied almost immediately, "I'll be there. Please just let me explain." I couldn't believe her audacity. Explain what? I thought. There was nothing left to explain. I wasn't interested in her excuses or half-hearted justifications, but I didn't reply. I'd save that for when we were face to face. The next morning, I woke up early, barely able to sleep. I drove to the house, the place that used to be our home. As soon as I stepped inside, I was hit with a wave of nostalgia mixed with bitterness. This was where we'd built our life, where we'd raised our kids, celebrated holidays, and made memories. Now it felt like a hollow shell, tainted by everything that had come to light. Linda showed up right on time. She walked in nervously, her eyes red and puffy like she hadn't slept in days. She was holding her phone like a shield, and I noticed immediately that she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. That detail hit me harder than I expected. "Thanks for agreeing to meet," she said softly, standing just inside the door as if she were afraid to come closer. "Don't thank me," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. "I'm not here to make things easier for you." That seemed to set the tone for the conversation. We sat down at the dining room table, the same table where we'd shared so many family meals. Linda started talking, her voice trembling, going through the motions, saying all the things I expected to hear. It wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. She kept repeating herself, cycling through the same tired excuses, as if saying them over and over would somehow make them true. "Stop," I said, my patience running thin. "I don't want to hear excuses. I want answers." She looked at me, confused, as if she didn't understand what I was asking. "How long?" I demanded. She hesitated, clearly trying to figure out what would be the best answer. "A few months," she said, her voice faltering. "Try again." I spat, fury rising in my chest. Her face crumpled as she realized she couldn't lie her way out of this. "Almost a year," she whispered, barely audible. "A year." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I clenched my fist under the table, trying desperately to keep my anger in check. An entire year of lies. My voice shook with rage. A year of you pretending everything was fine, all while you were screwing around behind my back. She flinched, but I couldn't bring myself to feel any sympathy. How could I? How many times had she smiled at me, kissed me, told me she loved me, all while sneaking around behind my back? I couldn't wrap my head around it. How long have they known? I demanded, my voice tight. Linda winced, her eyes darting away. "Not the whole time," she mumbled. "A couple of months ago?" I pressed, unable to keep my disgust out of my voice. I didn't want to drag them into this. "But you did," I interrupted sharply. "You made them part of your lies. Do you have any idea what that's done to me?" She didn't respond. Instead, she started crying, full-on sobbing, as if that would somehow make it all better. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she sobbed. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I was so unhappy." "Unhappy?" My voice echoed in the empty house, growing louder with each word. "You were unhappy, so you decided to blow up our family? You were unhappy, so you cheated on me and dragged our daughters into your mess? Do you have any idea what you've done, Linda?" She just sat there, crying into her hands, unable to respond. And for the first time, I didn't feel sorry for her. "You've ruined everything," I said, quieter now, the weight of it all sinking in. Not just our marriage, but my relationship with Betty and Maria. How am I supposed to trust them after this? How am I supposed to look at them and not see this betrayal? I didn't want them to lie to you, she whispered through her tears. I didn't want any of this. Then why did you do it? I shot back, frustration building again. Why didn't you come to me? If you were so unhappy, why didn't you try to fix things instead of sneaking around behind my back? She didn't answer. Maybe she didn't have one, or maybe she thought whatever she said wouldn't change what had already been done. After a long silence, I stood up, the decision finally clear. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice calm but firm. You'll hear from my lawyer soon. Please don't do this, she begged, standing up, her voice pleading. We can work through this. We can fix it. There's nothing to fix, I snapped, my voice cold. You made your choice and now I'm making mine. Before I walked out, I turned to face her one last time. By the way, don't expect me to pay for Betty's wedding anymore. She can ask her boss to foot the bill since you two are so good at keeping secrets. Her face crumpled again, but I didn't stick around to see her reaction. As I walked through the house and out the door, I paused in the hallway, staring at the family photos on the wall. There we were, me, Linda, Betty, and Maria, smiling like the perfect family. I used to love those photos, but now they felt like a cruel joke. I grabbed the nearest one, a picture from Betty's high school graduation, and smashed it against the wall. The glass shattered, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. But it didn't last. As I walked to my car, something hit me. This was just the beginning. The confrontation with Linda was over, but the real battle was still ahead. I still had to face Betty and Maria. I still had to figure out how to move forward. And I still had to confront the painful reality that the life I thought I had, the life I'd spent nearly 30 years building, was gone. The confrontation with Linda had cleared the air, but it hadn't made things easier. If anything, it made the betrayal feel more real, more weighty. The anger I felt toward Linda was sharp, but it was focused. I knew what she had done and why. And now, I was walking away. The situation with Betty and Maria was far more complicated. They were my daughters, my flesh and blood, but they had chosen her. The day after I told Linda I was filing for divorce, I decided to meet with Betty and Maria separately. I couldn't just ignore them, and I wasn't ready to completely cut them off without at least hearing them out. But I knew this wasn't going to be some casual chat. The trust between us was shattered, and I needed to know if there was anything left to salvage. I started with Maria. She'd always been the more emotional one, and her texts over the past few days had been frantic, bordering on desperate. I asked her to meet me at a park near my brother's house. When she arrived, it was obvious she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were puffy, and she kept nervously fidgeting with her hands. As soon as we sat down on a bench, she burst into tears. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you." I gritted my teeth, trying to keep my anger in check, but it was hard. "Then why did you lie to me?" I demanded, my voice sharp. "Why did you cover for your mother? Did you think I wouldn't find out?" She wiped her eyes, looking guilty and lost. "It wasn't like that," she said quickly. "She told me about it a couple of months ago." I was mad at her, but she begged me not to say anything. She said she'd end it soon, that it was just a phase. I didn't know what to do. My fists clenched. "You didn't know what to do? You knew it was wrong, but you chose to protect her. You betrayed me, Maria. You stood by her and lied to my face." She shook her head, her sobs coming faster now. "I didn't want to hurt you, Dad. I swear." I leaned forward, my voice low but seething. "You already did. You both did. And now, I have to deal with the wreckage. All the lies, the deceit, and the fact that my own daughters turned their back on me." I stared at Maria, struggling to process her words. "So, you decided to protect her instead of telling me the truth?" I demanded. She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought she was going to stop. I didn't want to blow up the family if there was a chance she'd fix things. I didn't know it would get this far. "That's not good enough, Maria." I shot back, my voice cold. "You don't get to excuse what you did by saying you didn't know. You knew she was cheating. You knew she was lying to me, and you went along with it. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" She broke down again, her face buried in her hands. I felt a pang of guilt watching her cry, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about sympathy. It was about the damage they'd all done to my trust. "I'm not saying this to punish you," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "But I need you to understand how deeply this has hurt me. Right now, I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you the way I used to. Maria nodded, her shoulders shaking. I'll do anything to fix this, Dad. Anything. Just tell me what to do. I didn't have an answer for her. I told her I needed time to think. Then I left, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Meeting with Betty was a completely different experience. I asked her to meet me at a coffee shop, thinking it would be better to talk in a neutral space. She showed up 10 minutes late, looking polished and composed, as if nothing had happened. That alone rubbed me the wrong way. Thanks for meeting me, she said, sitting down casually. I didn't waste any time. Betty, why didn't you tell me about your mother's affair? I demanded, my voice tense. She sighed, leaning back in her chair as if she was too calm. Dad, I didn't want to get involved. It's between you and Mom. I thought it was better to stay out of it. Stay out of it? I snapped, leaning forward. I repeated myself, my voice rising with frustration. You didn't stay out of it, Betty. You lied to me. You covered for her. That's not staying out of it. That's choosing a side. I wasn't choosing sides, she shot back defensively. I was trying to keep the peace. I didn't want to make things worse. Worse for who? I demanded, my anger boiling over. For me? Or for your mother? She didn't answer, and that told me everything I needed to know. Betty, you're an adult, I said, my voice steady but laced with anger. You're getting married soon. If your fiancé did to you what your mother did to me, would you want everyone around you to lie and protect him? Or would you want someone to stand up and tell you the truth? That's different, she said, clearly annoyed. Mom made a mistake. It doesn't mean you have to throw everything away. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. A mistake? Is that what you think this is? She did not make a mistake. She betrayed me day in and day out. It is a mistake, she said firmly, her tone growing more defensive. People make mistakes, Dad. You don't have to burn everything to the ground because of one bad choice. One bad choice. I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. Do you even hear yourself? This wasn't a bad choice. It was a betrayal, by your mother, by you, by Maria. And you're sitting here acting like I'm the one overreacting. I'm not saying that, she quickly responded, her voice softening. I just think you're being too harsh. You're hurt, I get that, but you'll regret cutting us out later. We're your family. Family doesn't lie to each other, I said, my voice tight with anger. Family doesn't cover for someone who's tearing everything apart. You and Maria didn't just lie to me. You broke my trust. And right now, I don't see how I can move past that. She crossed her arms, looking frustrated. So what? You're just going to disown us? Pretend we don't exist? I am not going to pretend. I will cut you out of my life. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The weight of it all hung in the air. Finally, I stood up. I've said what I needed to say, I told her. I really hope you never find yourself in the same situation like me. She didn't try to stop me as I walked out. That night, I sat alone in my brother's guest room, replaying both conversations in my mind. Maria seemed genuinely remorseful, but I wasn't sure if I could ever fully forgive her. Betty, on the other hand, was a different story. Her refusal to acknowledge the seriousness of what she'd done made it clear that she didn't think she was in the wrong. For the first time, I seriously considered cutting them both out of my life. It wasn't a decision I wanted to make, but the thought of trying to rebuild a relationship with people who had betrayed me so deeply felt impossible. That night, I made my decision. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I told her to revise my will. Betty and Maria were to be removed as beneficiaries. Everything, my savings, my retirement fund, the house, would go to my sister and her kids. They had always been there for me, and I knew they wouldn't betray me like my own daughters had. When I told my brother, he didn't try to talk me out of it. You're doing the right thing, he said. They made their choices. Now they can live with the consequences. The fallout was immediate. The next day, Maria called me, her voice a mess of hysterical sobs. Dad, please don't do this, she begged. I know I messed up, but I love you. I don't care about the money. I just don't want to lose you. Her words hit me harder than I expected, but I didn't let it sway me. Maria, I'll always love you, I said, my voice firm. But love doesn't mean I can forget what you did. I need time. Maybe someday we can rebuild our relationship, but right now, I can't have you in my life. She kept crying, but I held my ground until she finally hung up. Betty, predictably, took a different approach. She sent me a long email, accusing me of being petty and vindictive. You're punishing me for trying to keep the peace, she wrote. I'm just trying to avoid conflict, and now you're ruining my wedding over something that has nothing to do with me. I didn't bother responding. There was no point. Then Linda tried to intervene. She sent me an email, the tone polished, carefully constructed, like she thought I'd fall for it. She begged me not to cut the girls out of my will, claiming it wasn't fair to punish them for mistakes she made. She even had the audacity to suggest that removing them would irreparably damage the family. You're really going to play that card? I muttered to myself, rolling my eyes as I read her email. I didn't bother responding to Linda either. She could try all she wanted, but I knew the truth now. The days passed, and slowly, I started to feel lighter. The anger was still there, but the suffocating weight of the betrayal wasn't as overwhelming anymore. Cutting ties hadn't been easy, but it was necessary. I needed to protect myself, emotionally, not just financially. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. It's been a month now since I cut Betty and Maria out of my will. I haven't heard from them directly, and I'm fine with that. I've heard from mutual friends that Betty is scrambling to find the money to cover the wedding expenses I'd been paying for. I don't feel a damn bit sorry for her. She made her choice when she sided with her mother, and now she's dealing with the consequences. Betty's marriage crumbled just as swiftly as mine had, though in a cruel twist, it mirrored my own experience. It wasn't long after the wedding that her husband, Greg, started showing signs of trouble. At first, Betty dismissed it. Work stress, long hours, all the usual excuses. But when Greg's behavior became impossible to ignore, Betty finally confronted him. The truth spilled out, and it was even uglier than she imagined. Greg had been cheating on her for months. Betty, devastated and betrayed, found out the hard way, through a text message he'd carelessly left on his phone. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She was no stranger to betrayal, but the depth of it, coming from her own husband, shook her to the core. She demanded answers, but Greg was evasive and defensive, barely offering a word of regret. He claimed it was a mistake, a momentary lapse, but Betty knew it wasn't just that. It was a pattern, a betrayal that went beyond just sex. It was the betrayal of trust, of her heart. Divorce was inevitable. Betty couldn't bring herself to stay with a man who destroyed what little was left of their bond. As the proceedings began, Greg did everything he could to make things as ugly as possible. He fought for half of everything, though Betty had nothing left to give. She felt the weight of the irony. A woman who had spent years protecting a man who lied to her, only to end up with nothing but pain and broken dreams. As for me, the divorce had been a long, drawn-out nightmare. After everything I'd been through, I knew I couldn't repeat the same mistakes. I had to make sure I was financially free from Linda, free from everything she had taken from me. I signed over everything I had to my sister and her kids. The house, my savings, my retirement. I couldn't bear to leave Linda or my daughters a single dime of what I had worked for all these years. They didn't deserve it. Linda certainly didn't. But the real sting came when Betty asked for help. She came to me, her eyes swollen from crying, asking if I could help her with the divorce. I had nothing to give. Nothing. I'd given it all away. There was no house, no money, no safety net left. The silence between us in that moment was deafening. I wanted to reach out, to help her, but I couldn't. I couldn't afford to. And the bitterness in my chest grew as I realized, in the end, that everything, every penny, every bit of what I had worked for, was gone. My marriage to Linda had left me with nothing but the shattered pieces of a life that once felt whole. Now, I was living with the consequences of my decisions, and I couldn't help Betty in the same way I once had. I could only watch as she went through the same pain I had, trapped in a web of lies and betrayal. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Emancipation. Eliza's voice rose an octave. Amelia, you can't be serious. But Amelia stood firm, chin raised defiantly. I am serious, Mom. I've done my research. In this state, I can file for emancipation at 14 if I can prove I'm mature enough to make my own decisions and support myself financially. Let me tell you about Ethan Carter, a man who learned the hard way that life can turn upside down faster than you can sign a prenuptial agreement. Ethan wasn't your average guy. He was a self-made success in the competitive world of boutique watchmaking, creating timepieces that cost more than some people's annual salaries. Yet, even someone who valued every second couldn't foresee the disaster brewing in his own home. Picture this. Ethan, a tall, lanky guy with salt and pepper hair and hands that could disassemble a watch blindfolded, stood in a courthouse with his world crumbling around him. The judge, a stern-faced woman with glasses perched at the end of her nose, had just dropped a bombshell. Despite his ex-wife Eliza's infidelity, and yes, We'll get to that juicy detail later. Ethan was now responsible for $6,500 in monthly spousal support. You might be wondering how that's fair. Well, fairness took a backseat in Judge Harriet Cyrus's courtroom that day. As Ethan stood there, his lawyer whispering hollow reassurances in his ear, he felt a familiar tick in his jaw. The same tick that surfaced when a gear wouldn't fit properly in one of his creations. But this time, it wasn't a watch he wanted to take apart and reassemble. It was his entire life. Now, $6,500 a month is no small amount. But that wasn't what truly bothered Ethan. No, what really twisted the knife was the custody ruling for his daughter, Amelia. Picture a 14-year-old girl with her father's dark eyes and her mother's auburn hair. A whip-smart kid who could solve differential equations faster than most adults could balance their checkbooks. Amelia made it abundantly clear that she wanted to live with her dad. "Dad gets me," she'd say, her voice laced with that familiar teenage exasperation. "Mom's too busy with her new boy toy to care about what I want." But Judge Cyrus, in her infinite intelligence, ruled that Eliza would provide a more stable environment for Amelia. Never mind that Eliza's version of stability involved a rotating cast of cocktail parties and late nights at the office with her young, ambitious colleague, David Morgan. As Ethan watched Amelia's face crumple at the judge's decision, something inside him hardened. He might have lost this battle, but the war? Oh, the war was far from over. Ethan Carter wasn't the type to give up easily. After all, you don't become a master watchmaker by throwing in the towel when things get tough. "I'll fight for you, Amelia," he promised, his voice low and determined as they left the courthouse. "Whatever it takes." Amelia, her eyes red-rimmed but fierce, nodded. "I know, Dad. We'll figure this out." And in that moment, as father and daughter faced an uncertain future, a plan began to form in Ethan's mind. A plan that would set off a series of events that nobody, not Eliza, not Judge Cyrus, and certainly not the young Mr. Morgan, could have anticipated. You know how they say the devil's in the details? Well, Ethan Carter was about to learn that lesson the hard way. See, Ethan was many things: a master watchmaker, a devoted father, and a man with a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas. But he never claimed to be an expert in divorce law. It was a Tuesday, just like any other. Ethan was in his workshop, hunched over a particularly tricky tourbillon movement when his phone buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times. He ignored it, lost in the intricate dance of gears and springs before him. It wasn't until hours later, his back aching and eyes strained, that he finally checked his messages. 3 missed calls from his lawyer, Liam Hayes. 5 text messages, each more urgent than the last. And 1 voicemail that made Ethan's blood run cold. "Ethan, it's Liam. Where the hell are you? The spousal support payment was due yesterday. Eliza's lawyer is having a field day. Call me back ASAP." Now, folks, let me tell you, Ethan Carter wasn't the type of man to forget things. He could recall the exact specifications of a watch he made a decade ago. Remember the precise moment he fell in love with Eliza, 2:17 p.m. on a rainy Thursday in April, and could even recite Amelia's class schedule backwards. But somehow, amid the chaos of the divorce and custody battle, he let this one crucial detail slip through the cracks. Ethan's hands shook as he dialed Liam's number. "Liam," he said, his voice tight. "What's going on?" Liam's voice crackled through the phone. "Ethan, buddy, you really stepped in it this time. Eliza's lawyer filed a motion for contempt of court. They're saying you're woefully disobeying the judge's orders." "But it was just one day," Ethan protested, pacing his workshop. "Surely they can't." "It's not just the day, Ethan," Liam cut in. "It's the pattern of behavior. The arguments in court, the snide comments about Eliza and her lawyer. Judge Cyrus is on the warpath. She's saying you're making a mockery of the whole process." Ethan's mind raced. He thought about Amelia and the custody battle still looming over him. He couldn't afford to antagonize the judge now. "What do we do?" "We? You're the one in hot water, my friend. But listen, I've got a plan. We're going to—" But Ethan never got to hear the plan. At that moment, a sharp knock at the door cut through Liam's words. Ethan opened it to find 2 stern-faced officers standing on his doorstep. "Ethan Carter?" one asked, though it wasn't really a question. "You're under arrest for contempt of court." And just like that, quicker than the tick of a second hand, Ethan's world turned upside down. As the officers led him away, he couldn't help but appreciate the irony. He, a man who had built his life around the precise measurement of time, had been undone by a single forgotten day. The last thing Ethan saw before the police car door closed was his workshop, the half-finished watch still sitting on his bench. He wondered, with a pang of regret, if he'd ever get to complete it. Little did Ethan know that this minor oversight was about to lead him down a path he never could have anticipated. A path that would test his resolve, challenge his principles, and ultimately change the course of his life forever. Turns out, judges don't take kindly to what they perceive as mockery of their rulings. Who knew, right? Before Ethan could say spare change, he found himself slapped with a contempt of court charge and a 6-month stint in county jail. Now, Ethan had never been what you'd call a rough-and-tumble kind of guy. His hands were more accustomed to manipulating tiny gears than throwing punches. So when he stepped into the jail, dressed in an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit that made him look like an overgrown traffic cone, he felt about as out of place as a Rolex in a dollar store. But life has a funny way of throwing you curveballs, and Ethan's came in the form of Jackson Reed. Picture a man built like a brick wall, with tattoos snaking up his arms and a scar that cut a jagged line from his left eye to his jaw. Jackson was the last person you'd expect to be friends with a watchmaker, but as it turned out, the two had history. Well, Jackson's gravelly voice carried across the common area on Ethan's first day. If it ain't the timekeeper himself. Ethan's head snapped up, recognition dawning in his eyes. Jackson? Is that you? It turned out Jackson and Ethan had gone to the same high school. While Ethan had been tinkering with watches, Jackson had been the star quarterback. They lost touch after graduation, their paths diverging wildly. But now, in the most unlikely of places, they were reunited. Jackson took Ethan under his wing, showing him the ropes of prison life. First rule, he'd say, his voice low as they sat in the mess hall, never show weakness. These guys, they're like sharks. They smell fear, and they'll tear you apart. Ethan nodded, trying to look tougher than he felt. Got it. No fear. Anything else? Jackson grinned, a flash of gold teeth gleaming in the fluorescent light. Yeah. Always know where the exits are, never turn your back on anyone, and for God's sake, don't drop the soap. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan found himself adapting to life behind bars. He kept his head down, did his work in the laundry room without complaint, and spent his free time plotting. Because Ethan Carter wasn't the kind of man to let a little thing like incarceration stop him from getting even. Late at night, as he lay on his thin mattress, listening to the snores and mutters of his fellow inmates, Ethan's mind would race. He thought about Eliza, living it up in their old house with that smug scumsucker David. He thought about Judge Cyrus, who'd so casually ruined his life with the bang of a gavel. But most of all, he thought about Amelia, stuck living with a mother who cared more about her social calendar than her own daughter. I'm going to make this right, Ethan would whisper into the darkness. Whatever it takes. And as he drifted off to sleep each night, the gears in his mind would turn, crafting a plan as intricate and precise as any watch he'd ever made. A plan that would change everything. You ever wonder how a person ends up in a place they never thought they'd be? For Ethan Carter, lying on a thin prison mattress and staring at the gray concrete ceiling, that question played on repeat in his mind like a broken record. Let's rewind the clock, shall we? Picture a younger Ethan, all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, fresh out of watchmaking school. He was at some fancy charity gala, fiddling with his cufflinks and feeling out of place among the glittering elite. That's when he spotted her. Eliza Bennett, a vision in a midnight blue gown, laughing at something someone had just said. Now, Ethan wasn't the type to believe in love at first sight. He was too practical for that, too grounded in the measurable, the quantifiable. But in that moment, watching Eliza's eyes crinkle at the corners as she laughed, he felt something shift inside him, like the satisfying click of gears falling into place. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Eliza, a rising star in corporate law, was drawn to Ethan's quiet intensity and passion for his craft. Ethan, in turn, was captivated by Eliza's sharp wit and ambitious drive. They were married within a year, much to the surprise of their friends and family. We were happy, weren't we? Ethan mused to the empty cell. At least for a while. And they were. The early years of their marriage were filled with laughter, shared dreams, and the excitement of building a life together. Ethan's watchmaking business took off, his bespoke timepieces becoming sought after by collectors and celebrities alike. Eliza made partner at her law firm in record time. They bought a beautiful house in the suburbs and started talking about having a family. Then came Amelia, their little miracle with curious eyes and a mind like a steel trap. Ethan remembered the first time he held her, this tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket, and the overwhelming sense of love that washed over him. It was a moment that felt timeless, like a perfectly crafted watch ticking away the seconds of pure joy. He looked down at her scrunched-up face and made a silent vow to always protect her, to give her the world. But somewhere along the way, things started to unravel. Maybe it was the long hours Ethan spent in his workshop, perfecting each tiny gear and spring. Maybe it was the late nights Eliza spent at the office, climbing the corporate ladder. Or maybe it was just the slow, insidious creep of complacency that can infect even the strongest of relationships. Whatever the cause, Ethan found himself living with a stranger. Eliza became distant, irritable. Their conversations, once flowing and engaging, devolved into terse exchanges about schedules and bills. Ethan threw himself into his work, telling himself that if he could just create the perfect watch, everything else would fall into place. But life isn't a watch. You can't take it apart, clean each piece, and put it back together better than before. The day Ethan discovered Eliza's affair was etched in his memory with painful clarity. It was a Tuesday. Why did all the worst things seem to happen on Tuesdays? He'd come home early, planning to surprise Eliza with tickets to the symphony, a peace offering of sorts. Instead, he found her in their bed with David Morgan, a young hotshot lawyer from her firm. The shock hit him like a runaway train, and in that instant, everything he had built began to crumble. "I can explain," Eliza had said, clutching the sheets to her chest, her face a mask of guilt and defiance. But what was there to explain? The evidence was right there, in full technicolor detail. Ethan had simply turned and walked out, his mind curiously blank. He'd driven to Amelia's school, picked her up early, and taken her for ice cream. As she chatted about her day, blissfully unaware of how her world was about to change, Ethan made another silent vow. No matter what happened, he would protect Amelia from the fallout. Now, lying in his cell, Ethan couldn't help but wonder if he'd failed in that vow. Had he been so focused on getting back at Eliza that he'd lost sight of what really mattered? The sound of keys jangling outside his cell jolted Ethan from his reverie. It was time for dinner. Another day in this purgatory ticking slowly by. But as he rose from his bunk, a new resolve settled over him. He might be down, but he was far from out. And Ethan Carter always had a few tricks up his sleeve. If you think navigating a messy divorce is tough, try doing it from behind bars. Ethan quickly learned that prison life came with its own unique set of challenges, each seemingly designed to test his patience and resolve. Take, for instance, the charming gentleman in the cell next to Ethan's. Todd, the bulldozer Briggs, a mountain of a man with a vocabulary consisting mainly of grunts and creative profanity. Todd, it seemed, had taken an instant dislike to Ethan. "Hey, Richie Rich," Todd growled one day as they stood in the chow line. "I hear you make fancy watches. Bet those soft hands of yours ain't never seen a real day's work." Ethan bit back a retort. He'd promised Jackson he'd keep his head down and avoid trouble. But Todd wasn't one to let things go. The assault came out of nowhere. One moment, Ethan was mopping the corridor outside the showers, lost in thoughts of Amelia and home, and the next, Todd shoved him hard against the wall, knocking the breath out of him. The next moment, a meaty fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling. Todd leaned over him, a nasty grin spreading across his face. "Not so fancy now, are ya?" What happened next surprised even Ethan. Maybe it was the pent-up frustration of the past months, or perhaps it was just good old-fashioned survival instinct kicking in. Whatever the cause, Ethan found himself fighting back with a ferocity he didn't know he possessed. The fight was short and brutal, ending with both men in solitary confinement. But as Ethan sat in the darkness of the hole, nursing a split lip and what felt like a cracked rib, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. A flicker of pride. "You did good, timekeeper," Jackson told him when he got out of solitary. "Showed him you ain't no pushover." But the pride was short-lived. That night, as Ethan lay on his bunk, the full weight of his situation crashed down on him. He was in prison, for God's sake. Missing his daughter's first day of high school, unable to protect her from Eliza's neglect and David's unwanted presence in their lives. That's when the idea began to form. A plan so audacious, so potentially disastrous, that it just might work. Ethan knew he couldn't do it alone, but he wasn't alone, was he? He had Jackson, he had friends on the outside, and most importantly, he had Amelia. As the lights flickered out for the night, Ethan allowed himself a small smile. The game wasn't over yet. In fact, it was just beginning. While Ethan was busy navigating the treacherous waters of prison life, his lawyer, Liam Hayes, was waging a different kind of battle on the outside. Liam was what you might call a legal alchemist. Give him a hopeless case and a law book, and he'd somehow spin it into gold. "Ethan, my friend," Liam's voice crackled through the prison phone. "I think I've found our loophole." Ethan leaned closer to the receiver, ignoring the impatient shuffling of the inmates lying behind him. "I'm listening." "Okay, so here's the deal," Liam began, his voice taking on that excited tone he got when he was about to unleash some legal wizardry. "We're going to argue that the original divorce settlement was made under duress. You were emotionally compromised due to the discovery of Eliza's affair, which led you to agree to terms that were not in your best interest." Ethan frowned. "Will that work? I mean, I did agree to the terms." But that's where it gets interesting," Liam continued. "We've uncovered some, let's call them irregularities, in how Eliza's law firm handled the case. Seems they might have withheld some crucial financial information during the negotiations. If we can prove that, we might be able to get the whole settlement thrown out and renegotiated." For the first time in months, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. "And the contempt charge?" "Working on it," Liam assured him. "I'm filing a motion arguing that your delayed payment was due to a misunderstanding of the terms, not woeful disobedience. It's a long shot, but it might get your sentence reduced." As Ethan hung up the phone, his mind was racing. This could change everything. But there was still one crucial piece of the puzzle missing: Amelia. Meanwhile, across town, young Amelia Carter was hatching a plan of her own. At 14, she was already showing signs of her father's determination and her mother's shrewd intelligence, and she decided it was high time she took control of her own destiny. Emancipation? Eliza's voice rose an octave. "Amelia, honey, you can't be serious." Amelia stood her ground, chin raised defiantly. "I am serious, Mom. I've done my research. In this state, I can file for emancipation at 14 if I can prove I'm mature enough to make my own decisions and support myself financially." Eliza scoffed. "And how exactly do you plan to support yourself?" A sly smile spread across Amelia's face. "With the trust fund Grandpa set up for me. The one that matures when I turned 14, which, as you might recall, was last month." The color drained from Eliza's face. She'd forgotten about that trust fund, a parting gift from Ethan's father before he passed away. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to support Amelia comfortably through high school and beyond. Ethan was neither predator nor prey. He was a craftsman in a world where precision mattered, and he was determined to navigate this unfamiliar terrain with the same meticulous care he applied to his watchmaking. He began observing the dynamics around him, taking note of the unspoken rules, alliances, and rivalries that governed life behind bars. He learned who to avoid, who might become an ally, and where the best opportunities for assistance lay. During the daily exercise yard sessions, he spotted fellow inmates exchanging favors, from food trades to information. Ethan thought back to his time in the workshop, where every piece had its purpose, just as every inmate seemed to have a role. He figured it was only a matter of time before he could carve out a space for himself in this new reality. And then there was Jackson. Their bond had grown deeper, forged through shared experiences and mutual respect. Jackson had connections on the outside, which Ethan planned to leverage. One evening, as they shared a rare moment of quiet in the mess hall, Ethan leaned closer. "I need your help with something," he said, his voice low. Jackson raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" Ethan explained his plan. It wasn't just about his own situation anymore. It was about getting the resources and support that both he and Amelia would need to fight against Eliza and David. They needed to be ready to take action when the time was right. Jackson nodded slowly, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "All right, I can help you get in touch with some people who can assist with your plan, but you need to promise me one thing. Stay sharp and don't let your guard down." Ethan felt a surge of gratitude. For the first time since entering prison, he had a tangible path forward, a way to reclaim his life and fight for his daughter. The gears of his plan were starting to turn, and he was ready to make his move. Ethan Carter was discovering that prison operated like its own little ecosystem, filled with predators, prey, and a lot of people just trying to get by. But Ethan? He was finished with merely surviving. It was time to thrive. The day after his conversation with Liam, he found himself confronted by one of the less savory aspects of prison life. Officer Eric Simpson. This particular guard had a reputation for being particularly unpleasant and now cornered Ethan in a secluded area of the laundry room. "Word is you're some big-shot watchmaker," Simpson sneered, his breath hot and sour. "Bet you've got some cash stashed away on the outside. How about we strike a deal?" Ethan felt that familiar tick in his jaw, the same sensation he got when a complicated watch mechanism refused to cooperate. But instead of backing down, he found himself standing taller. "Officer Simpson," Ethan said, his voice low and steady, "I'm going to give you some free advice. I'm not the man you want to mess with. I've got friends on both sides of these walls, and trust me, you don't want to find out what happens if you push me." Simpson's eyes widened slightly, clearly taken aback by this response from the usually quiet inmate. "Is that a threat, Carter?" Ethan smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Not at all. Just a friendly warning. You might want to look into who my cellmate is. Does Jackson Reed ring any bells? The color drained from Simpson's face. Everyone knew Jackson's reputation and, more importantly, his connections both inside and outside the prison. Just stay out of trouble, Carter, Simpson muttered before hastily backing away. As Ethan watched Simpson retreat, he felt a transformation within himself. He was no longer just a victim of circumstance. He was a player in this game, and it was time to start acting like one. With Simpson off his back and Liam handling the legal side, Ethan could finally focus on the main event, his revenge plan. It was time to take down Eliza, her law firm, and the corrupt Judge Cyrus. The plan was audacious, complex, and just crazy enough to work. It all hinged on one crucial element, hidden cameras. But not just any cameras. Ethan had designed these himself. They were miniature marvels of technology disguised as everyday objects. Watches, of course, but also pins, cufflinks, and even a particularly gaudy tie pin that no one would look at twice. Amelia, with her brilliant mind, played a crucial role in planting these devices. Her emancipation had granted her unprecedented access to both Eliza's home and her law firm. Under the pretense of reconciliation attempts, Amelia skillfully distributed the cameras throughout key locations. "You sure about this, kiddo?" Ethan had asked during one of their supervised visits, concern etching lines on his forehead. Amelia had simply rolled her eyes. "Dad, I've been sure about this since the day they took you away. Trust me, I've got this." And boy, did she ever. Over the next few weeks, the cameras captured a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. Clips of Eliza and her colleagues discussing less-than-legal tactics to win cases. Judge Cyrus accepting bribes to sway her rulings. Even young David Morgan, in a moment of drunken candor, admitted to falsifying evidence in several high-profile cases. But the real coup came when the cameras captured a late-night meeting between Eliza, Judge Cyrus, and several prominent local politicians. The topic of discussion? A massive land development deal that would displace hundreds of low-income families. The profit margins were astronomical, and everyone in that room was getting a piece of the pie. As Ethan reviewed the footage, carefully smuggled to him by Jackson, who had quite the network of allies on the outside, he felt a grim satisfaction. This was it. The smoking gun he needed to bring it all crashing down. The day the story broke, it was like a bomb had gone off in the quiet suburban community. Local news stations ran the footage on a loop, showcasing respected community leaders caught in the act of conspiracy, fraud, and corruption. Ethan, watching from the common area TV in prison, couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction as he saw Eliza's carefully crafted image crumble before his eyes. Her law firm, once the toast of the legal community, was now under federal investigation. Judge Cyrus had been removed from the bench pending a full inquiry, and the involved politicians were scrambling to save their careers, turning on each other like rats on a sinking ship. But Ethan's revenge didn't stop there. Oh no, he had one more ace up his sleeve. Remember those intricate, one-of-a-kind watches he used to make? It turned out quite a few had found their way onto the wrists of some very influential people. Faced with the prospect of being implicated in this scandal, those individuals were more than happy to speak out in Ethan's favor. Suddenly, the narrative began to shift. Ethan wasn't just a bitter ex-husband lashing out. He was a whistleblower, a man who had sacrificed everything to expose corruption at the highest levels. Petitions for his release began circulating, and legal experts on TV debated the validity of his original conviction. Through it all, Amelia stood tall, facing the media storm with a poise beyond her years. "My father," she told reporters camped outside their old home, "is a man of integrity. He taught me that the truth always comes out in the end. And now, the world can see that truth for themselves." As the dust began to settle, Ethan found himself facing an unexpected reality. His plan for revenge had worked better than he could have ever imagined. But as he sat in his cell, waiting for the wheels of justice to turn once more, he realized something profound. The sweet taste of revenge he'd anticipated was overshadowed by something else entirely: pride in his daughter and a burning desire to make things right. Ethan knew he had a long road ahead, but for the first time in a while, he felt a sense of hope. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about redemption and rebuilding the bonds he had fought so hard to protect. In the end, justice has a way of finding its mark. Ethan's conviction was overturned, and he walked out of prison a free man. Amelia, as promised, was waiting for him with open arms. Together, they rebuilt their lives, stronger for the trials they'd faced. Ethan returned to his workshop, crafting timepieces that told more than just the hour. They conveyed a story of resilience, of truth prevailing against all odds. Each watch became a symbol of his journey and the bond he shared with his daughter. As for Eliza and her cohorts, well, let's just say they had plenty of time to reflect on their choices. The fallout from the scandal served as a stark reminder that the truth has a way of surfacing, and those who play with fire often get burned. In the end, Ethan realized that while revenge had its moment, it was the love for his daughter and the integrity he had fought to uphold that truly defined him. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I'm Ethan Hayes, 34, and I was married to Sandra Hayes, 30, for 4 years. This is the story of how I ended up hiding in plain sight. I first met Sandra at a Saturday morning office party that I couldn't avoid. It was meant to introduce new employees and announce promotions, a celebration of sorts. I was one of the people receiving a promotion that day, a move to a senior broker position at the brokerage firm where I worked. By then, my personal portfolio was growing rapidly, and I was on track to hit my first million and secure a partnership by the age of 27. My clients were thriving too, which added to the momentum. Sandra was on the arm of Ryan Bennett, my chief competition for the next partnership. He was a major butt kisser and very risk-adverse, so while he seldom had big losses, but his upside gains were only about 30% of what I did for my clients. As a consequence, my client list was growing and his was shrinking. He was and is an a-hole that lets no slight to himself go unpunished. I disliked the jerk from the first day he joined the firm. His first statement after he was introduced for his promotion from associate to broker. "Good morning, people. I'm going to be the next partner within the next 2 years. I am also going to become the top producer here, so watch out." Well, that statement went over as if he had shit on the floor in front of the office door. One of the partners walked up to the podium and angrily grabbed his arm and took him into a cubicle to berate him in a private setting. He then raised his voice and everyone and their dates and spouses could hear. The first question, which was, "Do you want to be working here tomorrow?" Before Ryan could answer, "If you do not go out there and offer a sincere apology to those people who have proven to be valuable employees, you will not be here tomorrow. You need to tone down your undeserved arrogance and start living up to the person you are in your own mind. You ain't there yet." He issued the apology and went back to the partner and whispered something to him. The partner nodded, and that was the last we saw of a-hole that day. He apparently went back to where he was living. He left Sandra at the office. The rest of the promotions and awards were made, except for mine. My promotion was made last, and I was asked to say a few words. "Good morning. I know that you don't want a long-winded speech, but remember it is me speaking." That brought some chuckles. I need to thank our research people. They are the ones that helped me choose a strategy for each of my customers that I would not have received without their help. So, research, when the party is over, lunch is on me at O'Casey's. Then I walked back to join the party. Another of the partners came up to me and quietly told me that I would get my partnership when the next board meeting occurred. He also asked me to take the young lady that came with Ryan to her home, or wherever she needed to go. I went over to the young lady, who had not been introduced to the group, and introduced myself. After she introduced herself, I explained to her that I was assigned to take her to her home, or wherever she needed to go. I also told her with a slightly amusing smile, "That is the most pleasant assignment that I have been given in ages." She giggled. "Maybe not. I could be the Wicked Witch of the East, and you just haven't seen that side of me. I doubt that very much, a fairy princess, or a genie, but not a witch." That got a full belly laugh. Then she explained that she was Ryan's cousin by marriage, and she had been dating Ryan. She added that his words and actions today meant that she would not be dating him again. I took her back to her apartment. When I dropped her off, I laughed and explained that the condo I was leasing was just outside of her complex's fencing. I pointed to the building. She asked me if we could meet away from the office sometime. I said that I would like that, and we exchanged phone numbers. I headed back to the office and work. Ryan came to work the next morning and took his place in his cubicle. My old cubicle was next to his. He looked into the cubicle, probably to insult me again. Something he did with great regularity. He discovered the cubicle empty, and thinking I had quit or been fired, he stood by with a whoop and a fist pump only to see the sign painter putting my name on my new office. Ryan was silent for the rest of the day. For that matter, he never gave me another verbal insult. I called Sandra, and we made a date for the following weekend. We had a great time, and more discussion of her cousin. She told me that Ryan was extremely angry when he called to inquire about how she got home from the meeting/party. When she told him that she was done with him, and that I had rescued her from being stranded at the party, he ended the call. She went on to say that she hasn't talked to him since that call. We dated for about 6 months and Sandra was offered a promotion that she had worked hard for, but would require her to move away from the city. We had a goodbye dinner and a wonderful night in her apartment. Breakfast was entertaining, and she dragged me back to her apartment for a goodbye session. 2 years later, she returned with another promotion. She called me as soon as she arrived in town. We got together to have coffee and catch up. I explained that while I dated several nice ladies, none of them were Sandra, and I was not intimate with any of them. Sandra said basically the same thing. I told her of my promotion to full partner and of Ryan quitting when the partnership was announced. Sandra laughed and said, "Ryan is and always has been said a legend in his own mind." Then she added, "Watch your back, Ethan. Ryan is not one to take a lost prize to someone else without trying for revenge." We made arrangements for additional dates. We began a courtship dance that lasted 18 months. I asked her to marry me, and she agreed. We both decided that we needed to protect our assets, so we had a prenuptial agreement drawn up. It protected each of our premarital assets and provided penalties for adultery and abuse. It also set conditions for custody of any children we might have. The wedding was great, and the reception was a fun and happy party. We honeymooned on a Caribbean cruise to the islands of Antigua, St. Kitts, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. We had a glorious trip and came home to my wedding present for my bride. It was a home on 80 acres in a little town of Pearson, Michigan. It was only about 25 minutes from my office in downtown GR and only about 15 minutes from Sandra's office in Cedar Springs. I did have the home in my name only, and the purchase date was several months before the wedding. I explained to Sandra that the home was mine, and I had been setting it up for a family to live in as I expected to be a father when she was ready. She loved the place, especially when she saw the 6 horses that were in the corral. She chose a bay gelding as the horse she wanted. Maybe it would be more appropriately say the bay chose her. He came right up to her when she went to lean on the top rail. I carried her over the threshold, and she took one look and started laughing. Every room that was visible was vacant except for catalog furniture pictures that were blown up to poster size. The kitchen had all new appliances, a card table, and 2 folding chairs. The bedroom when we got to it was a king-size mattress and box spring on the floor and 2 tall table lamps. I told her to buy what she wanted to furnish the house. Sandra turned to me with a big smile and said, "Nice to see a well-furnished home. You nailed it. This place has all the essentials. I think I can supply us with some luxuries like bedroom, living room, and kitchen furniture. Maybe even enough for the extra bedrooms and an in-home office." Then she grabbed my hand and dragged me toward the bed. Clothes flew in all directions, and a wonderful, fun time was had by all. We had all of the normal ups and downs, the arguments, and the makeup sex. Things were great until about 18 months after we married. She started to become distant and unloving. We had a very big argument about nothing. She froze me out in our marriage bed. Then Sandra came home from a doctor's visit with a big smile on her face and a big bounce in her step. She proudly announced that we were going to be parents. I asked her how far along the doctor said she was. She said 6 or 8 weeks. I didn't at that time think something was amiss. Afterwards, I had a moment of clarity. Later that night, I asked Sandra again how far along she was supposed to be. She again said the doctor said 6 to 8 weeks. I got up and grabbed my clothes for the next day and went into the guest room. Sandra obviously forgot the big argument that we just over 3 months before. She had refused me sex for over 8 weeks. I knew then that something was rotten in Denmark. I was extremely pissed and Sandra seemed oblivious, except she did ask why I wasn't sleeping next to her. I refused to answer until I had a plan in place. A week later, thing got even worse. I woke up normally with a major piss hard. Then when I went to piss, it felt like my willy was on fire. I had enough STI stories to figure out that I had a dose of the clap. I went to the health department and got tested. It came back positive for gonorrhea and as icing on the cake, chlamydia. I listed all of my recent sexual partners on one line. There was only one name on the list, Sandra. I talked to the people at the clinic and asked that they delay for 5 days talking to my wife. That would make it the next Wednesday. It would actually be 8 days. When they understood that it was my wife, they agreed. I drove toward home in an awful mood. I stopped at the drugstore for the 3 prescriptions that the doctors at the clinic prescribed. I moved into the guest room again and moved my dresser into it. I took all of my hanging clothes into the guest room closet. Sandra came home from work as I was just taking the last of my clothes into the guest room. "Why are you moving your stuff? I thought you were over your snit." "I am over my snit, as you call it. I just got back from the doctors. I have an infectious disease, and I don't want to hurt your baby, so until I am not infectious, I will stay away from you." "Well, is there anything I need to worry about? And what did you mean when you said the baby is mine and not ours?" "You think about it for a while, and you will figure it out in a few days." For now, just stay away from me until I get the all clear. I started my exit strategy that evening. I decided to leave, and I also decided to wait on the divorce for the kid to be born. I knew it wasn't mine, but I had no idea who was the father. Sandra will know that I know she is cheating, but I have a plan to disappear so she can't have me served. I learned a trick in grade school playing hide and seek in the gymnasium. We would sit on the floor in a circle in the middle of the basketball court. The child that was, it would go and sit on the piano bench and lean down on the closed keyboard, cover his or her eyes and count. The 5 children who were chosen to hide would hide anywhere they could, but they were not allowed to leave the gym. When my turn to hide, I whispered to 2 of my friends to leave a space between them to let me sit there. The girl put her head down and started counted. I ran around in a noisy circle, then turned and tiptoed to my friends and sat down on the floor just like I had never left. It worked several times, and it finally was banned because those kids that used it were almost never caught. I had an idea that would allow me to hide in plain sight. It didn't involve a name change. It didn't require surgery. It didn't even require me to leave the area. It took me 3 days to start making my move. I had called in sick for the entire week and the next as soon as I discovered the diseases. That Friday morning, I packed all of my stuff and went to an extended stay hotel. I contacted and arranged to have my house put on the market with an initial inspection next Thursday. Sandra would know that I knew by then. She probably would scream bloody murder and accuse me in absentia of cheating on her. Her one blind spot in an otherwise almost perfect personality was that nothing was ever her fault. She refused to accept the blame for anything. She probably believes her baby was made by me. Cheating would mean she did something wrong. I knew that my leaving would vindicate in her mind that it was me that was wrong. But when the house and property was going on the market, she would understand that whether I was right or wrong, she was without a home and would have to find someplace to live. If her sugar daddy or boyfriend or lover or whatever he was to her bought the property, then she could stay. But if the lover was as I suspected Ryan from our first meeting, he doesn't have the means to buy the place. I was going to hide in plain sight, but I would not be recognizable. I kept up on the properties for sale in the county and in nearby Langston. An Amish family was moving to a bigger farm, and because no one in the Amish community wanted to buy the place, they put it on the open market. It did not have electricity or up-to-date plumbing, but I could have that put in. The price was very cheap for the 92-acre property, and it was only 20 minutes from Pearson. I would not have the property in my name, but it would be in the name of my trust fund. It would be a matter of public record, and Sandra knew of the trust fund. The sale of my current house would be handled by an agent, so if Sandra or her lover bought it, I would not be there for the close. I sold my partnership back to the brokerage, cashed out my personal bank accounts, and had my stocks assigned to the trust. I had a couple of estate and criminal lawyers check to see that what I was doing was legal and that I could not be compelled to give up assets in my trust. They assured me that while it was mean, it was legal. I had almost $3 million in liquid assets, and the trust had another 5. I could hide out for years. Then I took on the Amish style of dress and facial grooming. In 4 weeks, I looked like most of the other men in the community. My car was parked out of sight in the barn, and I had several neighbors leave their horses in my fields. I even bought an Amish black buggy and parked it alongside of the house. I was gone Wednesday when the health department and the sheriff arrived to give Sandra the bad news. She was compelled to list her sexual partners for the last year as the disease was advanced. I had paid a couple of $1,000s to one of the people at the health department to give me her list. First, she tried to say it was just me, but the diseases were very advanced in her and only had just started in me. She ended up spending a weekend in jail before she gave up 4 names. Ryan Bennett was one. I did not know the other 3. I decided to have them investigated, and it turns out the other 3 were working with Sandra. Somehow Ryan was injured when shot in a drive-by shooting and was rendered impotent. That cost me 10 big. Then Mark Harlan, Victor Lawson, and Tommy Fletcher were each victims of a mugging. For some reason, my name never came up as a suspect. At least I was never interviewed. The house quickly sold. Surprise, my trust was the buyer. Sandra had to leave as the new owners wanted immediate possession and paid her a small premium to buy the furniture that was in the house. She had enough to buy a house in the village or in Grand Rapids. I relished in the appearance of just another Amish farmer. I actually saw Sandra drive past several times. I knew she was going to the prenatal clinic in Greenville. After the baby was born, I was going to contact my lawyer and had him serve Sandra with divorce papers. After thinking it over, I went ahead and started the divorce. The house was rented to an adjunct professor at Ferris State College. He had a 2-year contract and didn't want to live near campus. I planned to move back when the divorce was final and after the professor's lease was up. Sandra fought the divorce. I had my lawyer present the names of her lovers and a blood sample to prove I was not the father of her baby. Sandra fainted, and her lawyer dropped the objections to the divorce. The judge looked at the prenup and awarded Sandra $1. The divorce was final about 6 months ago. Sandra had a miscarriage and lost the baby, and I decided I liked the simple life I was living in Langston. I took over an adjacent farm when it went up for sale and had a newlywed Amish couple move in to work the 2 properties. I sold the Pearson property at a hefty profit to a logging company run by a couple of my Amish neighbors. They logged it for all of the hardwoods and white pine and then subdivided it and sold it off at a profit. I even worked as a general laborer for them occasionally. I never have come face to face with Sandra since the divorce, but I have kept track. She must have had an epiphany as she was living like a nun, and only leaving the small house she bought for work and to go to the store. She never has visitors that I have found out about. I am sad that she had cheated on me, but I was not lonely as the local Amish community has pushed me on their single, non-Amish friends. I have a couple of nice younger ladies that I entertain 1 or 2 weekends a month. They each know of the other as they are spinster sisters. I have invited them to move in with me. I am anxiously waiting for their answer. Life goes on. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.